welcome. Thanks to all of you for coming to this summit, Manufacturing a Better Paying Pennsylvania. I'm Andrew Stetner. I'm a senior fellow with the Century Foundation and our Rediscovering Government initiative. And I'm going to, for a more formal welcome, I'm going to welcome our president, Mark Zuckerberg, a longtime leader in the labor movement.
Thank you, Andy, and welcome. My name is Mark Zuckerman. I am president of the Century Foundation, and thank you so much for coming today. It's a great turnout. The Century Foundation is a 98-year-old progressive think tank with a deep commitment to reducing inequality and fostering shared prosperity. Before we get started, I want to thank our many co-sponsors, the Steel Valley Authority, Keystone Research Center, Heartland Capital Strategies, National Call to Action, and the AFL-CIO for sponsoring this event. I also want to thank our wonderful hosts, the United Steelworkers, and their legendary President Leo Gerard. Thank you to the elected officials that are either here or will be joining us today, Council Member Rudika, County Council Member Walton, State Senator Ward, and Secretary Dennis Davin. Thank you also to the Bernard Schwartz for his generous support of Rediscovering Government, Jeff Madrick, who will be up in a minute, its director, Andy Stetner, and the rest of the Century team that are here to help with today's panels and help set up the event today. Today, I can't help but think about the front page story that ran in the New York Times Sunday about the Rexnord Corporation in Indianapolis, a manufacturer of bearings. Did people see this, either online? One of the workers, Shannon Mulcahy, an unprofessed trailblazer, a female steel worker at the plant. She started at the company at age 25, and by 43, they told her she was finished. Her boss called it a business decision. To her, the article said, it felt like the back of a hand on the face. Renord's average wage was $25 an hour. In Mexico, they're paying workers $6 an hour. Over the years, Shannon gave the company her all. She regularly lifted 75 pounds of steel, and her hands were regularly soaked with oil. She sacrificed mightily for the company. She worked the second shift, 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., making it hard to win custody of her daughter and keep tabs over her teenage son. To add insult to injury, the CEO of the company, Tom Adams, wanted Shannon to train the very workers from Mexico that were taking their jobs. The Times story concluded, in today's model, chief executives like Mr. Adams get more compensation in stock to align their interests with shareholders who are now considered more important than any other stakeholders. That's why Mr. Adams made more than $40 million, and this is in the Times, over the last 6 years as he ended the careers of 300 workers. Leaving workers like Shannon to fend for herself after all those years of loyal service is flat out wrong and disrespectful. In the end, cut and run is neither a good business strategy or a viable economic vision for a great nation. If I were to do a riff off of Michelle Obama, when they go low wage, we go high wage. Today, we are here to listen and learn and share ideas that represents a much more optimistic vision for our country and one of shared prosperity. Among the things the panelists and some of you will be talking about today is how to create good-paying manufacturing jobs, how to lift up manufacturing institutes that can make sure that all regions of the country have access to good technology, how to encourage collaborations among regional firms to be more competitive, how to strengthen job training, and give more comprehensive help to those who become disabled. We can do better, and this conference will kick off a sustained effort by the Century Foundation and by many of our partners here to move us to a day where we have high-paying, good-paying, real jobs that stay in the United States. So it's a thrill to be here today, and thank you so much for coming.
Let me reiterate Mark's thanks to all of you for attending. We really appreciate it. This conference is really about you and with you, and we hope to learn a lot from you. I'm the director of the Rediscovering Government Initiative. I, with Andy Stetner, are now focusing on what we call high-wage America. As Mark said, some people are choosing the low-wage road. We are now explicitly, and for the next 2 years, talking about a high-wage path. The main premise of our work is that low wages were not inevitable. America chose low wages. They chose it through its policy. Now, if you listen to a mainstream economist, or almost any mainstream economist, they will tell you about the inevitable forces that naturally led to low wages in America, or at least non-competitive wages. They'll talk about globalization. They'll talk about skill-biased technology. Some will talk about immigration. And in recent years, of course, and this is a real problem, low productivity growth. Our argument is that's not even half the story. The main part of the story is the policies we've chosen. But let's think about where we stand in terms of low wages. Stagnating wages we know about since the late 1970s for the bottom 80% of the population. Inequality, they stagnate, the well-off soar, the very well-off, I should say. Low-wage workers, 24% of Americans earn less than 60% of the median wage. In European countries, that's a mark of poverty. It's a much higher percentage than it is in our rich neighbors. We retain the highest poverty rate in the world, a pretty persistent one, though it's come down recently, persistently higher than anywhere else. My own pet peeve is child poverty levels, which are higher than anywhere else. What am I leaving out? One thing that may interest you, one statistic that we computed ourselves, and it's in the booklet, the little pamphlet you got on high wage society, is that our manufacturing workers earn less than most manufacturing workers adjusted for PPP, price parity, in Europe. Manufacturing workers get paid better than non-manufacturing workers on average in America, but they earn less than Europeans in manufacturing jobs for the most part. That's not a small matter. Of course, we have a very low minimum wage. On it goes. How did we get here? Let me quickly make some points here. Federal Reserve policy has been too tight since the early 1980s. Evidence of that? Well, you all remember when mainstream economists would tell us you can't have an unemployment rate below 6%. Turned out we could go below 4% without inflation. It was nonsense, but it was the prevailing thinking of Alan Greenspan and Ben Bernanke, who followed him, who was the author of inflation watching. We were too scared of inflation. We kept rates too high, and we kept unemployment too high throughout that period. In fact, the CBO, the infamous now CBO, computed what the natural rate of unemployment should be. For 2/3 of the time, our unemployment rate was above what they thought was the natural rate. That, I think, is evidence enough the policy was too tight. We did not use fiscal policy, the famous Keynesian fiscal policy, under the myth of that austerity economics would somehow bring wealth. It didn't. Not only that, austerity economics meant we cut social policies and didn't have the imagination to develop new ones, except the Earned Income Tax Credit, some expansion to the CTC, and a couple of others. All of them work-oriented. There were no social policies like we had in the 1960s. I wanted to mention a couple of other policies we chose that led to low wages. We often forget about the deregulation of finance. With the deregulation of finance, we got subprime mortgages, we got private equity, which almost invariably put pressure on wages. People borrowed a lot, and they fired a lot in order to pay off their annual debt. We got short-termism, which probably resulted in inadequate business spending. And finally, and there are a few more, please look in our paper, there was no industrial policy. In my lifetime, since I got out of school, industrial policy gradually became a dirty word, dirty phrase, nonsense. A victim of derision in economics conferences. You could not interfere with the market. It would always lead to inefficiency. This was disaster. Two more quick ones. Undue faith in free trade. We know about that. You can be a free trader and have smart free trade. We had a lot of dumb free trade. And finally, we didn't do anything about the minimum wage. We let the minimum wage, in terms of inflation-adjusted wages, fall quite low. Wages did not keep up with productivity growth in this period. Indeed, productivity rose twice as fast as wages. This is the implicit promise of free market economics, that wages will keep up with productivity, that workers are paid what they deserve. If there is one thing that was disproved over the past 30 years, is that labor markets don't work the way free market economists say they should. As you can tell, we blame part of the problem on the adoption and undue faith of the free market ideology. It's not that we don't believe in capitalism. We believe government is at least its equal partner. We are exploring three general areas about how to cope with this. One is new industrial policy, public investment, and infrastructure investment with a focus on manufacturing jobs. That's why we're here today. A second is education, much more aggressive programs for education, apprenticeships, and training people for the skills they need in manufacturing and other areas. And third is labor policies. Labor is another area. The lack of enforcement of labor laws, as well as the lack of enforcement of antitrust policies, also led to a low-wage economy. One last point. Just recently, speaking of mainstream economists, a handful of mainstream economists have turned their attention to the concentration of industry in America. They found that it led to lower business investment, lower wages, and in general, lack of competitiveness. Far more industries are dominated by a handful of firms. This should fly in the face of accepted economic theory, yet we did little about it, and we're still doing little about it in today's economy. So we'll address that issue. But finally, underlying all of this, we continue to need stimulative monetary policy and stimulative fiscal policy. Fear of deficits, continued fear of deficits is unwarranted. Deficits can't go on forever, but we're shooting ourselves in the foot when we don't use fiscal stimulus to invest in our nation, invest in the public goods we need. So we're going to pursue all three of those areas. This is, in effect, our kickoff. We're going locally to several other cities. We're going to have another conference in D.C. nationally. We invite you all. We appreciate very much your support. We hope we can contribute to your ideas. We know you will contribute to ours. Thank you. I think Tom Croft, Brad's going to come up for a moment to talk from the AFL-CIO. Thank you, Brad, for coming up.
Okay. For the record, I'm not Tom Croft, Brad Markell. We're going to switch the order a little bit and bring Leo up next. I saw Leo in Washington last week. We're kind of joking around a little bit how I should introduce him. Should there be a hockey theme? Should it be, in the interest of my own safety, I've decided just to cut the bullshit. And I just want to say, look, the former president of my union, Walter Reuther, once said that what's won at the bargaining table can be taken away at the ballot box. And I think we've seen a huge example of that in the last couple of elections and what our policies have done to make working people behind the eight ball in this country, and especially manufacturing workers. There's nobody in the labor movement that understands that better than Leo Gerard. He's put together a policy apparatus here in Pittsburgh and in Washington that is the envy of the whole manufacturing sector. They do great work. It's been put together by Leo, led by Leo, and he is going to show us today a little bit of a taste of what his view on how we're going to revive manufacturing. I couldn't be happier to be here to bring up my brother, Leo Gerard.
Well, from those of you that aren't, welcome to the home of the 6-time Super Bowl champs, 5-time Stanley Cup champs. Come on, let's go. Look, I literally don't know where to start. And I've been thinking about this for a while, and what I really sort of have at the top of my mental agenda, where's Tom Croft? About 20 plus years ago, a little company north of here, Franklin Steel, was coming out of bankruptcy. And they had been in a larger company that went bankrupt, and they were going to strip this little plant, Franklin Steel, that was part of the bigger conglomerate. And we got together with Tom. At that point, he was just starting out on his little soon project of early warning for plant dislocation and finding buyers and all that stuff. And we formed a little committee that we call the Grievance Committee, the Economic Grievance Committee. And the workers at this little plant literally refused to let it die. And in fact, they went into work, made sure the equipment was oiled, they painted what needed to be painted, and they kept this little plant from being mothballed. With Tom's help, we found a guy in Chicago. And before we got to that, most financial institutions said, yeah, this is a good operation. It's never lost money. It does good work. But it's not worth our investment. You're only looking for $4 million. If you're looking for $40 million or $400 million, it'd be worthwhile. Because I got to do as much work, the bank would say, for $4 million as I do for 40. So thanks, but no thanks. So somehow we found a kind of different cat in Chicago who came to meet with us with his pants stuck in his cowboy boots with silver tips on the end of the shoes. And I thought, oh shit, here we go now. But this guy put up the money and that plant's still running. And so that when we think about manufacturing, one of the things that sticks in my head is we got to work hard to hold on to the manufacturing we got, plus build on top of that. And one of the things that irritates the hell out of me is when I hear the talking heads, and even some of our friends, in fact, most of our friends, will say, well, I was in the Rust Belt. I view that as an insult to the workers. If you go into a steel mill or a paper mill, an industrial facility, it's not rust. In fact, most of these places are using advanced technology. If you go by a steel yard, you see all the rolls of steel? They all look the same, but most of them are different because they're scientifically designed. So that, again, I come to the point about manufacturing, of holding on to what we've got and at the same time planning for the future. The one thing that came out of the work that we started 25 plus years ago with Tom is we put together another committee that looked at pension funds. And I got, with my job as Secretary Treasurer, I got put on a pension committee as a trustee. And the first meeting, it's the Industrial Union Pension Plan, the AFL-CIO. The auto workers were on it, the steel workers were on it, and there were a couple of others that had participants in the Industrial Union Pension Plan. In the first meeting that I went to, the lawyer pulled me aside. He said, we need to have a little chat so that you understand how these pension funds work. And you have to make sure that you're investing and that you're meeting your fiduciary obligation of making investments where you know that those investments will be safe. I said, okay, I understand. He said, none of this social investing. I said, what do you mean social investing? He says, well, you got to go, you got to invest where you're going to maximize your return. And if you don't do that, you could be held liable. So how do I decide how I'm maximizing my return? Well, there's a general policy and blah, blah, blah. So you can't go and say that you're only going to invest in companies that make firearms. You're not going to invest in those. Or you're only going to invest in certain kinds of companies because you won't be meeting your fiduciary obligation. Well, what could be the outcome of that? You could get sued. Oh, really? I said, well, let me tell you what. I got a house, I got a truck, and I got a wife. Pick two. I never told my wife what I said. But for a long time, that's why we end up writing, with a lot of help, we put together a book and circulated around. Pension funds are nothing but workers' deferred wages in a union environment. I can't speak to a non-union environment. I've never been in one. But in a union environment, when we sit down at the bargaining table and we say we want a pension that's going to deliver X, the employer will say, as all of you must know, well, that's going to cost so many cents per hour. And we make a choice. We make a choice. So my view of that on a personal level, those pension funds belong to the workers. And that the fact that they've been hijacked primarily, I can remember the same times of meetings that we were having where I shouldn't mention the fund, but I will. The Oregon Teachers Pension Fund was investing in a company that was going to close mills in towns where when the mill closed, the teachers would lose their jobs. And that was going on all over, and still going on all over the place. So that workers should have a right to the deferred wages about sitting there and making their decisions of how to invest. And some of you might say, what the hell is he doing? Where's he going with all this? My view is that if we're going to recreate manufacturing, protecting the manufacturing we got, and grow manufacturing, we need to have access to capital. And the capital that's in those pension funds, the hundreds of billions that are in those pension funds, belong to us. We should be able to use those pension funds for the kind of returns we'll get by creating good manufacturing jobs, getting a return on that investment because you're making a product, making it in a community where people can have a job, and making it so they can have decent wages. So you end up with a win-win-win circumstance, as opposed to our pension funds being taken over by the wrong kinds of individuals. and making decisions about investing in things that will destroy our jobs. And, you know, maybe we'll invest in this thing because we'll get a great return by investing it in China. And, you know, how many of you ever occasionally watch that show, Shark Tank TV? I flip through the channels, and every now and then I'll find it. But the bald-headed guy, he's an asshole from Canada, by the way. Yeah. In fact, there used to be a TV show in Canada on the Canadian Broadcasting Network called Lang and O'Leary. They were supposed to be sort of opposite sides of the same coin, except Lang was a consultant for the bank and O'Leary was what O'Leary is. And I had to be on there one night, and we got into a debate, and it was the highlight of my Canadian TV experiences. I said, I really respect Kevin's right to be a complete nut and be wrong 99% of the time, and his right to do that is not one that I'm going to try to impose on. And that was on national TV. I never got called back. But, you know, to me, the use of our workers' deferred wages needs to be an important part of how we access capital for the regrowth of manufacturing, and we can do it by investing in the kinds of things that create good jobs. The other is that we have fallen into the trap, and I don't know if we'll ever be able to get out of it. That is the trap of hearing, and our members hearing, people in the community hearing, people being sold a bill of goods about so-called free trade. Free trade does not exist, and I'm willing to debate anybody about that. All trade is regulated. The question is, on whose behalf will it be regulated? And when we look at the trade agreements that have been signed by the United States, by Canada, they're not designed to raise our wages. Those trade deals have done unbelievable shifting of wealth. I don't know if you agree or not. A trade deficit is a wealth transfer. And if you look at what's happened, and just pick 3 current trade agreements, South Korea, PNTR with China, and trade agreement with Mexico. Each of those agreements have resulted in massive trade deficits, and each of those trade deficits is, in my mind, a wealth transfer. Use China as an example. China has gotten so wealthy so quick that they've determined that they're going to dominate the world in almost anything you pick up. They've become so confident that they will say that they're going to dominate, as an example, the solar panel industry in the world, even if they have to sell below the cost of production. Ford was going to build some vehicles in Mexico, and President Trump whined and moaned about it, didn't do much else. Ford says, yeah, we're not going to do it in Mexico, we're going to do it in China. We've now reached a point where all around the world, the mantra of free trade has been sold, and it really is the selling of a bad bill of goods. You can't get away from the fact that when you're asked to compete with a country and a process that works in reverse to what the needs of the citizens are, we represent the workers at Goodyear, just to use that as an example. A few years ago, Goodyear was teetering on the brink of insolvency. We bargain an innovative agreement. We saved some money. We didn't bargain a lot of concessions, but we shifted things around. We pushed the government to give them some relief. A few months after, they decided they're going to build a brand new tire facility in Mexico, in Monterrey. We got a pay stub from there just last week. How much is that trained Mexican worker who's going to be building tires? Tires aren't created, they're built by hand almost. How much is that Mexican worker making an hour? Take a guess. What'd you say? $7. A day? Pay stub, $1.78 an hour. Goodyear worker, about $23, $24, $25 an hour with pensions and benefits. Mexican worker, $1.78 an hour for a 40-hour week. Good luck. Where's the outrage? So you take our pension funds that are being used against us, investing in companies that will move, and I can guarantee you that our pension funds somehow are invested in Goodyear. You may even hear of Timken. Timken's one of the world's great roller bearing manufacturers. They own their own steel mills. One of our presidents, I.W. Abel, came out of the Timken plant. Teachers' Pension Fund from California, part of a group that says Timken has to be broken up because there's more value in it if you break the bearing company away from the steel company. So when the shit hits the fan on steel, what will Timken have to do? What's the long-term future? Pension funds made that come to pass. How many have heard the word Alcoa? How many heard the word Arconic? Arconic is Alcoa broken in half. Hedge fund guys who have a lot of our pension money in their portfolio decided that Alcoa was better off broken in two. So they were going to split it into old Alcoa and Arconic, which is the new Alcoa. The new Alcoa makes components. The old Alcoa makes aluminum. What will happen in the long run is Alcoa will be held hostage to the global price of aluminum and may or may not be able to give Arconic what it needs, and Arconic will be able to go buy that from China or some other place that pays $1.78 or less an hour. So in my view, when we talk about, as well we should, talk about the future of manufacturing and where we're going to go with nanotechnology and artificial intelligence and all of those very important things. To me, one of the more important things is how do we rebuild the infrastructure that this country needs in a way that we can use our own capital, which is our pension funds, and that we can do that stuff by advancing manufacturing and by building the manufacturing infrastructure with training in schools, making sure that people understand working in manufacturing is not bad, it's good. Manufacturing workers, union or non-union, generally make more than non-manufacturing workers, although they should all be union, make even better. How do we do that? When I was a kid, and a lot of you here are around my age, when I was a kid, you couldn't graduate high school unless you took 1 year of shop, one piece of shop every year for 4 years. So grade 9, grade 10, grade 11, grade 12, you had to take one shop class per year in order to graduate. I went back to my home area not that long ago, last spring in fact, and the school boards were closing the schools for all kinds of different stupid reasons. The high school that I went to was the only school left that still had shop class. So there was a big, imagine, community rally to try and save the school and save the shop class. I can almost guarantee you that in Allegheny County, you couldn't count enough high schools on your hand that teach the working with skills, work with your hands, is skilled work. So that we need to go back and talk about the importance of manufacturing, the importance of building the infrastructure for people to be able to get the skills, the needs to go out into the workplace. When I was, again, use me as an example, when I left high school, I went to work in a smelter. I thought that would be a summer job till I bought a car, and then I was a prisoner. You know, a lot of you laughed because a lot of you did the same shit, eh? Bought a $400 car and it ruined my life almost. Anyhow, I lost my train of thought as well. If you think about in those days, when I went to work in the smelter, there were probably about 200 apprentices in the smelter. It was large, and we had 3,000 employees in the smelting and milling, and we just called it reduction section. There were about 300 apprentices. Those apprentices worked their way through almost every department in the company over their 4-year apprenticeship. And they were skilled, and they got trained by the work that they did and supervised by the journeyman. Now, you go to a company and you say, how many apprentices do you have? Most of them have none. And they might look at you if you've got a good score coming out of community college on a certain level of skills. Maybe you're a skilled welder or electrician, and you've come out through the community college system. But that again puts the onus on the public to train workers to give companies. We need to have the debate and push the debate in our society that employers should have apprenticeship programs. Now, there's some Siemens I know has got an interesting deal in some of their plants where you're working for Siemens, but you go to school. So you're school to work sort of. Siemens brought a chunk of the German model to some of the plants in the U.S. They didn't bring the unionization concept, but they brought the training concept. And we should put a lot of heat on them for that. And when I was looking at just some thoughts I had about jobs, and you put those pieces together of capital, major push for skills training, major push for apprenticeships, and then you have the concept of, if you're using combination of workers' deferred wages and taxpayer dollars, shouldn't the overwhelming majority of that benefit go to the workers in the society? And so then you get to the Buy America provisions. And if you think about it, roads, bridges, pipelines, water treatments, schools, I was running my mouth for the longest time. And I was sort of brought alongside by Tom Harkin. Tom Harkin talked about this constantly, that more than 50% of our schools are more than 60 years old. Think about retrofitting schools. Think about retrofitting public buildings. Think about putting this together so that you had a long-term plan. I remember listening for the transportation bills, and you'd pass a transportation bill that would be funded for 2 years. Who's going to make a major investment in if you know it's going to happen later? So if you could put together the strategy to be able to access capital, be able to access training, being able to put manufacturing on the front burner, to be able to then have a 5, 10, 15 year. We just spent, I won't say as much, we spent a lot of money retrofitting this building. The outside looks like it has 6 elevators, we only have 5. We now have 5 elevators that work more efficiently than the 6 we had and use less energy and are faster. We got brand new boilers on the roof. We resealed all the windows. We did a whole bunch of stuff. If you're down in the lobby, what you'll see is that how much we cut our carbon emissions out of this building, but also you see how many man hours of work we had. And this is by any standard, this is small potatoes. Think about if you had a 20-year program using those points I just made, and you went to the oldest public building, 100 years old, and you retrofitted it to the current science. And you worked your way up over the next 20 years so that at the end of 20 years, all buildings, public buildings in particular, and joint partnerships with private sector buildings, what you could do. Here in Allegheny County, DeWitt can now do something about it. He's on county council. That at least once a year during the winter time, we have a pipeline break downtown. It got really cold and the water froze up, burst the pipeline, then water's everywhere. A couple years ago, they found that one of those pipes were made of wood. That's how old it had been since they were repaired and replaced. And again, you think about those things as a national strategy. Think about, oh, by the way, the utility workers have pointed out that leaky water pipes leak 1 billion gallons a day in the country. Of those billion gallons, that's water that's been through the water treatment facility. So you've already spent energy getting the water to a drinkable stage, then you leak 1 billion out across the country. I traveled with Carl Pope on the Blue-Green Alliance, and we went to see Senator Stetner just after he got elected. And we were talking about needing a national strategy to modernize the energy grid, how many jobs that would create to gain in all the stuff that's needed for the energy grid. And Carl pulled out his phone, and he said to the senator, "You see this phone? I can call China from here. And in a matter of a few seconds, it'll sound like we're just across the street." He said, you put energy on the grid, and depending how far it's got to travel, you're going to lose between 5 and 20% of that energy off the grid will be dissipated. So if we were modernizing the grid, we could create millions of jobs, and we would take carbon out of the air because we're using mechanical switching. You can go through almost every segment of our society like that that's been ignored. So that the way to regenerate manufacturing, I think, is to have a comprehensive strategy that touches all the components, and you start by going as quickly as you can into the use of the word industrial heartland as opposed to Rust Belt. The Rust Belt, in my mind, is just a term that minimizes the importance of workers and minimizes the importance of manufacturing and makes it appear that it's on a death spiral, and it won't be. Let me just close by saying that this might be a bit controversial, but I've got to leave, so it doesn't matter. That we're fighting a fight in some parts of the country where you've got some environmentalists that want to ban mining. And people need to understand that you can't make steel without iron ore. You can't make a battery without copper and nickel. And they don't grow on trees. What we need to do is understand that we have to make a partnership with the environmentalists so that we're doing what has to be done to have the raw material, to have an infrastructure, to have a manufacturing strategy, but we need to insist that that's going to be done in the most environmentally sound and the most environmentally progressive and the most scientifically progressive environmental way possible. And if that means that you got to pay an extra penny, then you pay the extra penny, but you're creating jobs and you're doing the right work for the environment, and that was why we created the Blue-Green Alliance. It's not good jobs or a clean environment, it's not either or, it's both or neither. And the best place to start with giving that example is by talking about manufacturing in a way that gives people the assurance that we have a strategy, we have a plan, and we're going to fight like hell to defend and grow manufacturing. And then I heard, just before I sit down, I heard you talk about industrial strategy. I can't begin to tell you how many times I heard, can't do that, can't do that. One of the little nitbits of having fun in politics once in a while is I was in a meeting called by Vice President Biden. It was just me and two other people, and during the meeting he said, "Leo, we're making progress, man." And I said, "What are we doing?" He said, "God damn it," he said, "I got to use the term industrial strategy and no one jumped on me." So Joe's a pretty good guy, but he's our champion out there. So thank you all very much.
Well, thank you, Leo. Let's give another round for Leo Gerard, who's really, again, done more to save our economy than just about anyone else in the U.S. Starting with the steelworkers' work on trade, the formation of the American Alliance of manufacturers, bringing many of those industries into that coalition, the formation of Apollo Initiative, the Blue-Green Initiative, Blue-Green Alliance, support for the Steelworkers Authority over the years, working with Governor Rendell and pushing the Next Generation Manufacturing Initiative, and then dearest to my heart is his support, his founding of the Heartland Capital Strategies movement, which he talked about as the Grievance Committee, which we formed 20 some odd years ago. So we're passing around an article that was written by Steve Herzenberg and Andy, appeared in the op-ed. We're actually now thinking about another series of next generation manufacturing strategies for Governor Wolf, and there's going to be a middle-class task force to think about these things. I want to acknowledge Carrie Amon from the governor's office. Thanks for coming. Thank you very much. And Carrie's been a real dyed-in-the-wool supporter of ours for many years and has been tremendous at pushing some very innovative economic and workforce development strategies at the state while at the Department of Labor and Industry for many years, and now in the governor's office. So we're really happy you could come. So thank you. So I wanted just to thank the Century Foundation, Mark and Jeff, Andy, Lucy, Alexandra, and the whole crew, because as you see today, this is the second event we've held. We started in D.C. and we were honored to have Senator Casey and Marcy Kaptur come to that event to kick off this set of discussions. We see this as a listening tour. I wanted just to kind of get right to the point. So we have an opening to talk about industrial policy again. In the heartland, there's towns and cities still suffering from the Great Recession. There's towns and cities that never recovered from the last recession or the recession before that. You have towns that are bankrupt, have suffered tremendous population loss, including many of the SVA's own communities, the Mon Valley communities. But think about it. Our communities were not devastated by natural disasters, but by man-made disasters for decades. Some were made by Wall Street. Some were made by bad public policy. And as Leo and others have pointed out, some by horrible corporate decisions. So Donald Trump won, the heartland states, and thus the election, partly due to his promise to reject bad trade deals and rebuild industries, and partly due to the voters' long simmering rejection of policies and programs that hurt working families. And the region, the states they live in, the communities they live in have suffered tremendous economic declines tied to all of these bad policies, trade-related losses in manufacturing, other policies that I call financialization, where we've moved our capital into short-term investments, and we've lost the long-term perspective on investing for the long term. But Trump wasn't the only populist in the 2016 campaign. Bernie Sanders echoed the belief that free trade agreements led to a loss of American jobs and depressed American wages. He said America needs to rebuild its own manufacturing base by using American factories and supporting well-paying jobs for American labor. So as we think about these last 20, 30 years of what's happened in this country, there was a sense that things were wrong, and especially in the heartland. The Cleveland Federal Reserve recently published a paper which is called What's Gone Wrong and Right in the Industrial Heartland. You can get it online, and it documents the depth of the economic pain. Accounting for the original jobs losses in the 80s as well as this last recession, the author points out that now, today, employment gains have been notably lower in both the industrial heartland's manufacturing sector and its non-manufacturing sector. So even the creation of service jobs has not kept up. Real per capita income, which is primarily derived from wage and salary income, grew much more slowly in the heartland than in other parts of the country. So this gap between incomes in the region and other parts of the country remained historically large through 2015. Steve Herzenberg, in his fine paper, as well as this op-ed, talks about that's the case also with the state of Pennsylvania and with Pittsburgh. So in terms of responding to the possibilities of rebuilding an economy, which I think most of us would want to be more sustainable, as Leo talked about, more inclusive, we should think about the work of the steelworkers and the work that other unions have done. Lynn Williams in the 80s really helped to save much of the industry that's here today through deploying labor-friendly investment banks. These strategies sometimes work because workers were empowered to participate in production or in ownership. Other unions, such as the machinists and pilots, followed suit. Ron Bloom, who was in this building for many years, who started at those investment banks, later went on to help save the auto industry as part of Obama's AutoZar program. Our organization, Steelworkers Authority, we were trying to do the same thing that the steelworkers are doing on a national scale. We were trying to do that in Pittsburgh and in the state of Pennsylvania. Our predecessors, I want to acknowledge Charlie McAllister, one of the founders of the SVA, and Tom McClovic, my vice chairman, where'd he go? Over there, former legislator from the Mon Valley, Turtle Creek Valley, set up a regional jobs authority in the late 80s to help prevent the closure of manufacturing businesses throughout the Pittsburgh region. We opened over those last 30 years 5 offices, and during that time we've helped over 1,300 manufacturing firms and saved or deferred the loss of 23,000 good jobs, including union jobs. A majority of those firms were here in western PA, such as Wendell August Forge, which is in Mercer County, a steelworker firm that rose from the ashes after the 2008 recession and a fire that burned it to the ground. Last year, actually, we helped a company called Bowman Hat Company in Lancaster, one of the oldest hat companies in America bring back their Kangol hat brand from China with the help of a Kickstarter campaign from Samuel Jackson. It was part of a broader reshoring movement that you're beginning to see in the country today, and it's one of those things where people are beginning to ask the question, you know, why are we shipping so much of this work overseas, and can we not produce it more productively and efficiently here? We were on a tour yesterday of the Almano site, the LTV site down in Hazelwood yesterday, and one of the drivers had a Kangol hat on, which was pointed out to me by my friends at the Century Foundation. And I wanted to make a point that we had helped to bring back the Kangol brand, and I said, sir, do you know what that hat is? And he said, I don't know. But it was a Kangol hat, so I told the story about how we work with the company, which is owned by the employees, which was established, Bowman was established right around the Civil War, actually, and they were making hats for Union soldiers. But over these times, we've sort of had to work on national economic policy as well as working in Pennsylvania. So we've helped 24 states try to establish layoff aversion programs, and we work with Senators Casey and Warren and NELP and the National Call to Action and the AFL-CIO in winning new requirements so that the Department of Labor now requires every state to establish a layoff aversion program. So that's where you start. You start with trying to keep what you have, as Leo talked about, as opposed to the kind of bargains that states are trying to make to lure companies in the competitions to try to bring companies into town and steal companies from other states. In terms of Leo's discussion about our pension money, we have in this country $9 trillion of defined benefits of pension funds, including $4 trillion in public and Taft-Hartley plans where workers have a voice. I want to welcome Dan Pedrati, capital steward with the construction trades, and they're doing a lot to try to continue moving to invest in construction and to rebuild cities. Overall, workers own $22 trillion in institutional assets. And some of the folks that we've worked with in the Heartland Network, including Ted Chandler, who's here from the Housing Investment Trust, they're working around the country to rebuild cities, revive our industrial commons, grow the clean economy, and make the boss more accountable. Jim Nolan is here from the Rec Fund, and the Rec Fund has now invested in 100 projects around the region. If you go to up and down the rivers, the Armstrong Cork building, buildings down on the Mon River, you'll see the work of workers' pension funds going into rebuilding parts of the city. So when we set up the Heartland Network, we really wanted to get to the question of why is our money destroying us? And we've worked over the years to both promote good investors and to help move capital into investors who are going to invest for the long run and rebuild our country. During that time, we've worked on 3 books, and my latest book, along with Annie Malhotra, who's here. Where's Annie? So Annie is our co-author. The book is called The Responsible Investor Handbook. It was published by Greenleaf Publishing, and it was actually commissioned by the AFL-CIO, and it's been distributed all around the country and Europe. As part of that effort, we're trying to set up an education platform to both educate pension trustees and also business students as to how to invest for the long run. And you know, with younger people, you don't have to make a hard argument about it. They're already there. Millennials are already there. So we're actually working with Georgetown University and establishing a pipeline, a diverse pipeline, to bring new talent into the investment world. And we're looking for partner colleges. We'll be trying to bring that program to Pittsburgh and to our colleges here. So today you're going to hear some tremendous discussions from both people who are doing great work in this region and also around the country. And we hope to now take this roadshow across the heartland over the next 2 years and to then create a set of regional industrial policies that will resonate with the public and hopefully will get the attention, come to the attention of our political leaders. Just want to draw one point in terms of some of the papers. Joel Yudkin has worked on a paper which is in your packet on revitalizing manufacturing cities. He's really we've been thinking about this paper for a couple of years. And it really is, I think, one of the most tremendous efforts that I've seen in recent times. As we didn't have an industrial policy in this country, what we had was innovation at the state and local level, or as some people call it, the democracies, the laboratories of democracy. Well, some of the work that Joel has done, I contributed to, Andy contributed to, really begins to set together a great set of regional industrial policies for the future. So please read that. Let us know what you think about it. We're going to probably have some kind of website where we begin a conversation as we go forward. And I think over the next 2 years, we'll hopefully begin to see a blueprint for building a more modern, and more inclusive, and more sustainable America. In closing, what we really need to do is to rebuild a jobs and investment coalition that will amalgamate people and power, capital, and innovative solutions in the heartland cities and states, and fight for good jobs, real economic recovery, inclusive development, and broad prosperity. We need to bring together both the shareholders of the economy, but also the stakeholders of local communities and businesses to take back the heartland. And I just want to make one last point. We need to end this torture of false gods, the miracle cures. When the Mon Valley was going bankrupt, people were leaving in droves, and that's what you have as part of what's called the Steeler Nation now. You've got any Sunday, you can have people in bars in Phoenix or Minneapolis wearing Steeler jerseys. Well, that's part of our population that left. And they were stricken down by these false gods, as I'll call them, the false gods of free trade, the gig economy, this idea of unlocking value. That's what they said about Timken Steel. We're going to unlock value. Well, Timken Steel has gone down since those hedge funds walked away with $188 million. Protégés of T. Boone Pickens. So, and they didn't consult with the steelworkers, who obviously they didn't consult with the family. And so you had a situation where, they unlock value for a few shareholders and for bosses. And so another one is the sharing economy. It's all over now. I mean, we have great ideas being generated in the sharing, and some of those are great, like the Wikipedia that's a great sort of crowdsourced thing. But people working in the shareholder economy and the sharing economy they're more like sharecroppers. Google, Uber drivers. So I want to just sort of say, let's start talking about building a blue-collar commonwealth and not a billionaire boondocracy as we have today. And I'm hopefully thinking that this could be the start of a process where we very thoughtfully build coalitions, reach across the aisles, work with people, and move toward an economy that's going to be more fair, an economy that our children will be able to live in and prosper in and learn in. So please join us. I want to thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for coming today, and let's get this ball rolling. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Tom, who's been an incredible partner in this effort. I'm going to call up the first panel. One thing we talked about with Councilmember Rudiak, who's so generously given her time on a busy day to moderate this panel, is we have a lot of great folks in the room, and we really do want to have this be a conversation with the panel. So we'll definitely be leaving some time and think about the questions and comments you would like to add to the conversation. So with that, let me turn it over to the council member who's going to lead this, our first panel.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Natalia Rudiak. I represent our South Pittsburgh neighborhoods, but not for long. I'm retiring in a few months, but I'm sure many of us will still continue to cross paths. I represent a very blue-collar, working-class area of Pittsburgh, many of whom were affected by job losses throughout the past few decades, and in many ways still have yet to see the gains from the resurgence that we talk about in Pittsburgh's Renaissance. So it's not only places like the Mon Valley or other parts of the region that are still experiencing difficulty, quote unquote, catching up with Pittsburgh's Renaissance, but places right here in the city of Pittsburgh as well. So we are here to discuss how to grow a Pittsburgh and Pennsylvania economy for all. And we have a number of fantastic panelists. And really to start, what we're going to do is allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves, introduce their relationship with this issue, and their work on this issue. And I am going to give you gentlemen 5 minutes each. So let's start.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Generette. I'm the Vice President of Community Engagement at Duquesne University. Before that, actually 10 years, I ran an organization called Urban Innovation 21, and our goal was to work to grow our region's economy, but also make sure that disconnected communities and populations were included in this new renaissance. And so a lot of our work was around tech and innovation, and a lot of the quote unquote new economic drivers. And so learned a lot. One of the big things I learned was that while we saw growth and we really saw our economy transform, that transformation was, as many of you know, very incomplete. One of the paths that my work led me down was really looking at the role of artificial intelligence and automation in job loss, because what I was seeing successful companies, right? But successful in terms of gross revenue, not success in terms of actually employing the people that we all care about. And so I think that's a very huge issue, and that's something that I hope we touch upon today. I had the pleasure of going to a Tesla dealership, and I'm a fan of Elon Musk and Tesla for two reasons. One, because of their work around sustainability, but two, because of the honesty that he has around the role that automation is and will play in terms of job loss, right? He's in the process of building a factory for the reduction of their quote-unquote affordable vehicle. I don't know how affordable is. It's between $35,000 and $60,000. I don't quite think it's affordable. But it's a factory that has no people working in the factory. And so I think we have to be very cognizant and reticent of this as we talk about manufacturing and the jobs that are going to be created. I mean, the World Economic Forum has said that, along with a whole host of others, that North America will lose between 30 and 40% of its jobs by 2030, right? And I really want to make sure that we're talking about and having a real conversation about what that means as it relates to manufacturing, because oftentimes when we talk about manufacturing, it goes back to old notions of manufacturing, which we all know isn't what the future of manufacturing looks like.
Thanks, Bill. I'm Steve Herzenberg with the Keystone Research Center, www.keystoneresearch.org. We also house the Pennsylvania Budget and Policy Center, www.bpc.org, and have a joint blog at 3rd and State, which is close to where our office is in the middle of Harrisburg. So I'm going to talk about an institutional economist's perspective on manufacturing, sort of informed by working on this issue on and off over our 22 years of existence. John Maynard Keynes once said, "Practical men who believe themselves to be quite exempt from any intellectual influence are usually the slaves of some defunct economist." Part of my message here today is that Pennsylvanians that want to revitalize our state's high-wage manufacturing sector need to get themselves a new defunct economist. They need to think about the economy in a way that is more grounded, more humane, and more capable of capitalizing on opportunities to reshore and retain manufacturing jobs and grow new ones. For several decades, America and Pennsylvania manufacturing policy have been shaped most by the free market and free trade, or neoliberal views of Milton Friedman. As disruptive technological innovation has become more prominent, there's also been a dose of economist Joseph Schumpeter in our national dialogue about manufacturing and trade. Schumpeter wrote about capitalism's creative destruction, or as another economist, also now dead, put it around the time of the NAFTA debate, to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs. One's perspective on that idea rather depends on whether you are the omelet or the egg. This difference in perspective also speaks to the disconnect between some elites and working families about manufacturing job loss. Neither the free market nor the creative destruction view of the economy wrestle adequately with the human and community devastation associated with the loss of manufacturing jobs. Western Pennsylvanians know this all too well. In this region, the median wage dropped $3.50 per hour in the 1980s, with larger drops for men with high school education and less, and larger still drops for African American men. Workers experiencing layoffs in the first half of the 1980s ended up seeing reductions in their annual income 10 and 20 years later that averaged $11,000 to $14,000 a year. In today's dollars, that's some families experience much larger plunges in earnings and family income. Since those disastrous 1980s, Pennsylvania has been waiting for a comeback. The economy has stabilized, thanks in part to the growth of eds and meds. The stars are aligning in ways that could allow manufacturing to broaden and strengthen our economic revitalization. Some companies, as Tom Croft said, are having second thoughts about the benefits of distant sourcing from low-wage platforms. Pittsburgh, in terms of this region, ranks 9th out of 100 cities, the 100th biggest cities relative to its economy in terms of research in innovation fields, and is a powerhouse in robotics, artificial intelligence, software, and several biomedical and healthcare segments. Growth in the city's startup support systems, mentorship, flexible workspaces, capital and talent attraction are fueling, as the Brookings Institution recently concluded, a new generation of high-value firms. Yet despite this potential, the manufacturing renaissance hasn't happened here yet. Pennsylvania, as Tom Croft again mentioned, has fewer manufacturing jobs than in the first quarter of 2010, 54,000 fewer than it would have if it had kept pace with the national pace of manufacturing growth since then. Pittsburgh, also, again, referring to Brookings, has tens of thousands fewer jobs in high-tech manufacturing than if its employment matched its research strength. So the Pennsylvania manufacturing agenda that is part of your packet outlines how Pennsylvania could ride the reshoring wave and grow advanced manufacturing jobs, with benefits for struggling urban neighborhoods and rural areas alike. We lay out specific ideas for reshoring and retaining jobs, expanding financing for existing manufacturers and innovation, building skills for 21st century making, and boosting demand for made in Pennsylvania goods and products, including through investments in infrastructure, better procurement policies, better trade policies, which the state could at least lobby for in Washington. Our agenda was developed in partnership with the Manufacturers Association of South Central Pennsylvania, the Business Voice for Manufacturing in Harrisburg, the Steelworkers, the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO, the Alliance for American Manufacturing, and the Steel Valley Authority. There is broad consensus among Pennsylvania manufacturing stakeholders in the need for a state strategy. So I'll also point you to the letter to Governor Wolf, that the stakeholders who wrote, crafted that Pennsylvania strategy just sent to the governor last week, highlighting various recommendations in that state agenda around apprenticeship, around reshoring teams, around responsible investment. Most of the public-private cooperation and investments we recommend would make sense to Alfred Marshall, an economist in the late 1800s and early 1990s, famous for studying what we now call industry clusters. They would also make sense to John Commons, an institutional economist who made the common sense but vital distinction between constructive and destructive competition. In a sense, that distinction gets back to one of Jeff Madrick's points, which is, in the end, how our economy evolves, how our manufacturing sector evolves Whether it evolves in constructive or destructive directions depends on policy choices that we make. For 35 years, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, and the United States have been guided by economists deaf to the destructiveness that their theories have wrought and blind to the pervasiveness of market failures and the need for government investment and public-private cooperation to economic prosperity. If today's event can catalyze bipartisan business, labor, community cooperation around a manufacturing agenda informed by a more powerful and grounded economic approach, we may achieve a more prosperous and a more just Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh in the future. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. My name's Jay Douglas. I'm with the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Institute. We are part of the Manufacturing USA network of institutes that were created under the Obama administration. We are the 14th and the last, likely, of these institutes. We're a public-private partnership. Our mission is to improve the competitiveness of manufacturing in the United States and drive job growth. We are funded by the Department of Defense because a vital manufacturing environment in the United States is a big issue of national security. We are also a private membership organization. We started a membership drive in August. We have 85 companies, universities, economic development agencies, community colleges as members already. We should have about 160 by our anniversary date, which is January 9th of 2018. We're focused on improving manufacturing through funding projects in technology as well as in workforce. We're a little bit different than the other Manufacturing USA institutes in that we're directly focused on workforce, not as an add-on to a technology project. In manufacturing, we know that there's a big skills gap. Right now, there's also a supply problem. And we're working on both of those issues around the country. We're a national asset, but we are based here we're in Lawrenceville, around lots of other robotics operations. We were stood up originally by a proposal out of Carnegie Mellon. We are a private nonprofit. There's just a million things I could talk about regarding what we're doing, but I'm really curious as to the questions that we may see. There's been a long history of investment in manufacturing at various times in the United States. I read an essay that was written by Alexander Hamilton in 1791, maybe some of you have seen it, about the importance of manufacturing in the United States. Then there was maybe a few others, but then December of 1941, when the president looked around the room and said, we need a lot of stuff, who's going to make it? And there was a problem. And so here we are again today. If you could only purchase what was made in the United States, you'd be naked, sitting on the ground, and unable to communicate. And we're going to try to fix some of that. We're not going to solve it, but the holy grail to me is the cell phone and the cotton button-down shirt. I'm not sure what the cotton button-down shirt has to do with national security, but if we could start making those with a level of automation that drives employment and competitiveness, I think we're probably on to something that could transfer to other things. Anyway.
Thank you.
Oh, one other thing. Forgive me.
No,
I don't know if
please.
I've used my 5 minutes.
No, you haven't. You have one more minute.
I do have another minute. Okay. I grew up in Mount Lebanon. I live in O'Hara Township. I raised 3 children. I didn't raise my children to work in factories, and that's okay. I have a pharmacist, a banker, and a guy that works in the outdoor industry. Things are different now. There's great jobs in manufacturing. I have a request. Let's not call them manufacturing jobs. Let's call them things like robot technician, automation expert, those kinds of things, because those are the jobs of today. And I think those are the kind of things that people will be driven to and want to do. And as many people have already said this, they're good paying jobs with great benefits, and we need them. We need people that want to do that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. I think I turned it off. Well, they're all on. That's the
They're
issue.
all on. Watch those side conversations.
This is not part of my time. First, I just want to say thanks to Jay, because the AFL-CIOs paid a lot of attention to the Manufacturing USA, and in all the other centers, workforce is kind of like a little thing they bolt on at the end instead of doing it as part of their main work, and it really makes a big difference. I'm the executive director of the AFL-CIO Industrial Union Council. It's a group of 12 unions with almost 4 million members, about 1.2 million in manufacturing. So the council itself is the presidents of all those unions, includes Leo and Dennis Williams of the UAW and so on and so forth. I want to start by, this is a policy panel, but I start a little politically by saying, if we don't control the narrative, if we don't take care in how we're talking about manufacturing, what happened in the election, and what do we need to do to go forward, we're not going to have the chance to put the policies in place that are going to make us successful and be successful for working people. And there's a big debate in the Democratic Party about this right now, that some folks think that, if you talk about class politics, if you talk about jobs, that's in conflict with talking about the rising American electorate. And we don't believe that's true. We believe that the working class is everybody. Stan Greenberg has written very convincingly about this to me, and we want to sort of reclaim that narrative around what unions do, how we bargain for technology, how we can make the United States a place where working people have a better shot than they have today. I think the second thing for me to say is that we need manufacturing to solve the problems we have in this country. We need manufacturing to make clean energy goods, to make more efficient cars, to take pollution out of our environment, to raise our standard of living. So it's really important. It's not just a jobs thing, but it's about where's our society going. Now, manufacturing provides a lot of high-paying jobs, $25, $26 on average. But the little known fact, and part of what's driven the angst in manufacturing, is that manufacturing has a low pay problem. And in fact, if we had a fight for 15 in manufacturing, about 40% of manufacturing production workers would get a raise. I work for the UAW. I bargained in many, many concession agreements with pay under $15 an hour, well under 15 in some cases. 11% of all manufacturing workers are temps today. This is an issue we have to get. There are places where Japanese companies have come in. Toyota's got factories that are 40% temp. Nissan, where they're making batteries for the Leaf, the electric car, 100% temps. So we have to confront this sort of low pay ethos that's in manufacturing. Part of it is what Leo was talking about, trade. It's hard to compete with somebody making $1.78 an hour and say that you're going to hold these $20, $30 an hour jobs. Industrial policy is really important. We do have an industrial policy in this country, which is a guy named Chalmers Johnson said, our industrial policy is that all the states try to screw all the other states. And we have this mega giveaway game going on where companies come in, they're going to maybe be held to some job numbers. They certainly won't be held to any job quality standards in manufacturing, which we'll hear about on the second panel, something that's extremely important. And so we have to sort of be conscious about what we're doing with industrial policy. Where are we pushing? We suffered deindustrialization all across the North and in a lot of cities. We have to consciously push manufacturing back to urban areas so that we can offer a fair shot to people who currently don't have a fair shot in manufacturing, and increase manufacturing's diversity. Manufacturing 20 years ago was a place where African Americans were equally represented in the workforce, and in the auto industry they were overrepresented. But as we deindustrialize and William Julius Williams wrote about this without buying into his troublesome thesis, but he documented quite a bit what happened to manufacturing. Tech policy is really important. Manufacturing USA is huge. The MEPs are huge. We have to look, you can look at competitors on two ends of the scale. One is China. You should go on the internet and find China 2025, and they'll tell you what they're after and what they're doing. Solar power is just the start of it. The other, the high-end place, Germany, they also have very specific policies. They got this Fraunhofer network, which is sort of manufacturing USA plus MEP times 10. And we got to get there in this country. We need to have the best tech. We're not afraid of automation. We want to bring it on. If you look at, CNN had a video with Trump and Clinton voters in Detroit auto workers. The title of the video was Auto Workers Love Robots and Hate NAFTA. And that kind of sums it up. We know robots came into the auto industry 20 years ago. There's a lot of experience in the industrial sector with robots. Not something to be afraid of. And then just real quick, some policy hits. Skills are important. In the manufacturing sector, the AFL-CIO has ginned up this industrial manufacturing technician. We think it's the first federally registered apprenticeship for production workers in manufacturing. Over the past 2 years, we've stood up 307 of those apprentices in about 16 or 17 different companies. Some big companies are getting interested. General Motors and the UAW put this apprenticeship in their apprenticeship standards. We had another program where we stood up just in the last year 458 apprentices in manufacturing, helping union companies find the skills they need, creating new types of apprenticeships. And then finally, a couple of quick hitters of tax policy. We're going to get in a big fight. If we have a tax policy fight that results in what's known as lowering the rates and broadening the base, manufacturing is going to get screwed. And I really have to just beg our progressive friends to sort of stay in the moment and not get hung up with the VAT or a border adjustment tax or sales apportionment factor. And none of those things are on the table. And we've got to be, there's a lot of talk out there about them and a lot of energy towards things that, to repeat, are not on the table at this time. We need to stay in the moment and pay attention to what is happening with tax reform, because it could really hurt manufacturing if it goes wrong. And then the last thing, the old bugaboo for those of us that negotiate a lot of contracts. Healthcare costs are the monster that is eating the pay, eating the contracts. In a union contract today, the healthcare costs are going to be $8, $9, $11 an hour. And it's just impossible to provide steady wages to overcome falling real wages when we don't control healthcare costs in this country. And it's something that we have to go back to. Obviously, currently, we're headed in the wrong direction.
All right. Thank you all. So I've been taking a lot of notes and trying to pull all these threads together. So I have a two-part question. Packs a lot of punch, but we don't have a lot of time. So I hope we can figure this out. So, Bill, you talked a lot about Tesla and the factory of the future. We've heard about the political narrative, about how we're not telling the political narrative about how manufacturing is delivering on those jobs. The question is, will advanced manufacturing create jobs? And how can these jobs address inequalities between races and places?
So I think one thing we have to do is we have to be brutally honest. And I think oftentimes in our zeal to bring manufacturing back, I think we might be overselling the opportunity at times, right? And not necessarily taking into consideration that, we're in the midst of really an economic revolution. We're going to see more advances in automation in the next 5 years than we saw in the last 25 years. And it's going to create some job loss. It's also going to create some net job gain, right? But we have to be brutally honest, because we're not at a time where we can sell people dreams, right? The cynicism is worse than it's ever been. The reality is, as a country, whether it's 2030, 40, or 2050, it's going to be majority African American and Latino. But we have a cultural war going on, and we have people who are understandably upset because they've been sold a bill of goods, right? And I think that as we look at bringing back manufacturing, we really have to be brutally honest about what that's going to look like, and who's going to be able to take advantage of those jobs, right? Are we going to be able to get folks from rural areas to take advantage of those jobs? Are those jobs going to be concentrated in the urban core? I don't know. From a racial perspective, we have to be real careful because, again, there is this cultural war, and there's a large percentage of folks who were taken advantage of by the system that are part of this, and that's creating a racial divide like we've never seen.
Anyone else?
So will advanced manufacturing investments create jobs? There absolutely are examples of people that automated and probably cost some jobs. There's also the American automotive industry, and you look at a company like Amazon. You follow their investments in technology and you look at the job growth, substantial in both cases. I think that jobs are definitely changing and the nature of work is changing. The job that you're going to have in 5 years is vastly different than the one you have today. It's been that way for me. Having graduated from high school in the mid-'70s, I know that things have evolved very dramatically since then. So yeah, advanced manufacturing can create jobs. They're just different jobs. You're not going to come out of high school. Was the example that the gentleman mentioned earlier today about no shop classes. You're going to need some training. Take advantage of it, and there are positions out there. 85% of manufacturers in this country say that they can't hire enough qualified workers. That's a very loaded statement, but I think if you go and you try to dissect it and see what the gaps are, manufacturers in rural parts of the country are having real problems with supply. There's issues around demographic, age and availability of the workforce. There's also the opioid issue. People come, they sign up, they get one paycheck, and they vanish. It's a reality, and those are things that need to be dealt with. The issue of equality, one of the things that we're doing, and this is just a little thing, we're a small little group of 14 people right now, but we're investing in trying to close some of these gaps, and one of them, we're only 8 months old, so we're just getting started. But what is it, 47% of the workforce is women, 25% of the manufacturing workforce is women. We're working on one little project right now to change that. Getting more women active in the manufacturing segment. We're gonna look at other programs through our partners at MEPs as well as in community colleges to try to close the gaps on the supply and the training side as well. And I think, I hope, as we're more effective and the other organizations that are doing this kind of work are more effective, hopefully those gaps are going to close.
Just very quickly, Germany's manufacturing employment is close to 20%. We're less than 10%. We're not going to get to 20% in any scenario, but obviously certain places like Elk County in north central Pennsylvania fairly recently had 40% manufacturing employment. So, and the heartland in general, it's more important. So clearly in certain places for certain folks, increasing the number of manufacturing jobs, making them high-wage jobs is going to remain critical. In terms of expanding opportunity in places like Chicago, and if we get things right, Pittsburgh, it's going to be critical. Obviously, the giant service sector, that $15 in the union thing, are going to be hugely important in terms of the overall inequality problem, but manufacturing plays a role and is vitally important to our living standards, and in terms of the strength of our economy, its significance obviously goes well beyond its employment share.
Sure. All right. So this was touched on, but on that note, what challenges exist to those manufacturing businesses here in Pittsburgh or in Elk County, and what kind of supports do they need?
I'll give a short answer, and I'll pick up on Brad's discussion about the war between the states, the amount of money that gets spent getting a company Amazon, for example, to locate in one place rather than another. It's just crazy. I mean, the papers being released today make very clear that the investments we need to make in apprenticeship or skills, other approaches to skill development, in innovation partnerships between universities, and industries, including the institutes. I'm down the reshoring team that sort of needs to educate companies about. They can open their mind to the possibility of sourcing in the U.S. and they can learn about companies in their industry that may have brought stuff back, and there are suppliers that have the skills that they need, right? So all of these investments are typically public-private investments that benefit a lot of different companies. And the public sector, states and localities in particular in the U.S., spend all their money on checks for individual companies and massively underinvest in the infrastructure of a high-wage economy. So we I think have to address that issue. If we were smart about the money we spent, then those companies in Pittsburgh and in Elk County would get a lot more of the support they need.
Can I just follow up on that? You mentioned that, oftentimes, whether it's public officials or even folks in the private sector are kind of chasing the dragon and chasing that one company. Why do you think that is? Why do you think we're chasing instead of building?
Well, I mean, look, a large manufacturing company like Ford or Airbus or whomever have you has a very large backward pull in the economy. These are prized objects that play well in the paper, they play well with voters, and the job promises are there, and people want them. The supply chain implications are huge. So I think that's why they chase it. On the first question, it's the shiny thing that all the voters want. They want to see action from politicians. On the first question, the vast majority of manufacturing companies in this country don't sell to consumers. They sell to other companies. They're part of the supply chain, the mythical small and medium-sized enterprise. And what we know is that most SMEs in manufacturing are poorly managed. They could really use the kind of help that MEPs provide. There are hundreds of thousands of manufacturing companies, small ones, to whom lean production is a new concept, right? They don't know how to control their inventory. They don't have quality processes. They don't have succession plans. They don't know, they don't have a long-term financial outlook for their company. So we can do a lot with manufacturer services. And then I think, outfits like Jay's come in and helping them access technology. That's really important. They don't have technology budgets. They don't have a lot of really fancy engineers, and they need the public sector and public-private partnerships to step in and help them.
Yeah, I think we're chasing companies because we need jobs. I mean, to be honest with you, if Amazon is going to bring 50,000 jobs, we'll chase them, right? I think the challenge becomes, what are we chasing? Are we chasing that company that's going to bring in 10 jobs, 15 jobs, 100 jobs, 200 jobs? I mean, when we're talking about 50,000 jobs, we need jobs. People need to work. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the economic statistics, but there are a lot of people that are underemployed. There are a lot of people that aren't working. There are a lot of people that are suffering, and people need jobs. And I don't think that can be understated. So when we talk about Amazon, let's be real. 50,000 jobs. That's that's a lot of jobs.
There was some discussion about reshoring, and so the question is, you've mentioned some successful examples, but what's the right way to bring back jobs from China and other nations to Pittsburgh?
Well, I'm just going to say some things that are based on some of the work that the Steel Valley Authority and partners like the Chester County Economic Development Council have done on the ground in Pennsylvania. literature seems to suggest that, big surprise, companies' location decisions, whether they go overseas or stay here, are based in part on fad and sort of what the conventional wisdom is, right? And so the whole reshoring movement a few years ago sort of basically began to address the fact that the analytical tools that companies use to figure out produce here or produce overseas sort of have built-in biases towards producing overseas. And so they don't adequately take account of the separation between production and engineering, or the cost of having a long inventory pipeline, or the fact that you can't be as responsive to market changes when you're sourcing from long distances, right? So, I mean, there's a decades-old deep conventional wisdom among American manufacturers about, oh, let's go where, you know, people are paid $1.78 an hour. So, I mean, the experience here was it's going to take a while to develop tools that sort of really are useful to companies and really do accurately assess the trade-offs. You know, you can talk in abstract terms about the costs of offshore versus the benefits, but in the end, you have to customize those analytical tools to a particular industry and or set of technologies. And so that work was sort of begun in Pennsylvania on the ground. So again, it's sort of like, in the end, it sort of, to me at least, it comes back to we should be making a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, U.S. Value-based commitment to we want to produce at home. So we want to therefore invest. Let's invest in tools that both help people not offshore when it's stupid, but they're also part of changing the calculus over time. And so, because it's not static, and so let's further capitalize on the advantage of local sourcing. So again, it's partly a political will issue. I mean, if we decide we're going to reshore at scale and put some money into doing it where it makes the most sense and get more businesses and suppliers sort of into the team, and you know, you want to make it work as well as you can each time. You want the company that brought that stuff back to be better off financially at the end of the process. If we have that political will, we can do it in a way that makes companies as profitable, but also makes our economy much healthier.
Any further comment on reshoring and bringing?
Well, yeah, so that's a brutally difficult question, and I don't have a great answer for it other than, you know, what we aspire to is finding ways to deploy technology to make our companies more competitive against companies that are building things like cell phones and computers and clothing and furniture overseas. And if we can do that, then that's going to be great, and you'll be reading about it in the papers. I think that there's another point about, you know, the localness of attracting companies, and I've always believed that resources go where they're treated well. Actually, that's something that came from Richard Florida about 20 years ago, money and people, and we as a community, you know, need to do that, and I think that's helped some businesses locate in Pittsburgh. The other thing is something I call the rock star effect, and I don't know how you change or affect that, but there's been many places that have located here because of a few individuals. You look at Uber, how many do they employ now? 800 or something, Bill? Argo, Aurora, Seagate a few years ago, they came here because of the rock stars. And, you know, boy, if you could figure out how to generate more of those, we'd be on to something. But yeah, it's a tough thing that if a company has already decided that they need to locate somewhere else, how do you make the economic argument, the supply chain argument, the resource argument to come back? And I think that's what it is. It's all about the bottom line.
So it's not the subject today, but that question can't pass without mentioning what we have to do on trade. And we have to do everything we have to do here, but we have to fix trade. And trade is not this thing that's just out there that you just let it happen to you, that somebody does and you don't say anything about. Currency misalignment is a real thing. And it's got a huge effect on how competitive we are in the United States. And there's just no way around that. Competing with people that have suppressed wages in Mexico, in China, is a real thing. In North America, we don't really have trade. We have economic integration. We need to think about it like that. So, while I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it, until we can fix trade practices and currency alignment, we are swimming upstream. And we've got a lot of things we need to do here, but we can't take our eye off of that ball.
I like that. We need less trade agreements, more economic integration agreements.
Yeah.
Well, on that theme, when we talk about even within the United States, right, we have divided communities. And manufacturing does have a mixed record on race. So what needs to happen to increase access to jobs and ownership in manufacturing?
I just say that we have to do exactly what the tech industry did not do exactly what the creative industry did not do. Richard Florida was mentioned, and I like Richard Florida because Richard Florida is one of the few academics that will go back and critique his work. And if you look at his most recent articles, he basically said that he was wrong in terms of the creative industries transforming communities. He actually said that it created an economy that was where the benefits were broken down by race, class, and gender. And that's exactly what we don't want. So we have to be deliberate. There's some great models. But I think one thing that Leo said that really struck with me, when you control the cash, right, you can control what you do with the cash. And that's how jobs have to be created. Because if we're going to look for the government, I mean, my gosh, the state government's broken, right? What, a budget with no revenue? I mean, what's that? I mean, like Illinois. The federal government is broken. So when we talk about policy, it's really going to be, like the housing investment trust. It's going to be, what Tom is doing. It's really going to be the use of our funding to create jobs, but relying on the tech industry to do it, and pretending that there's going to be a whole lot of jobs created and not a huge job loss. It just flies against all the facts, right? I mean, it's an emotional, it's a feel-goody thing, so we're gonna have to be real.
So one of the issues on ownership is, again, Tom Croft and others talk about the silver tsunami and retiring baby boomers. One related piece of that is actually worker ownership in the U.S. And so there's actually there's a surprising level of worker ownership, including through employee stock ownership plans in the U.S. And there's actually some new research that I haven't read yet, but the basic finding of which is that in terms of wealth, that worker owners end up accumulating more wealth, and that gaps are bigger for lower income folks and for people of color. So it's not by itself. It's it's going to be one of these modest things, but it's a really important thing, and it's something that Pennsylvania should do. And again, I know Governor Wolf partly, I believe the partial buyout of his company was partly worker ownership. He was also at a profit sharing company. So, I mean, there's this whole movement around worker ownership and around more democratic forms of business organization. And I think, that should make its contribution to the revitalization of manufacturing in Pennsylvania.
You can't improve diversity if you don't hire and promote women and people of color. Conceptually, it's very simple. Operationally, it's difficult. It starts with a stark admission that women have never had equal access or equal opportunity in manufacturing. It's right now 23, 25% of the workforce. Some of that is the way that young women are pushed by our system, but we have to be honest about what it's like to work in a manufacturing facility for a woman too. I worked in a factory for a long time. It's not an easy place for a woman to work, as that New York Times article points out. So we have to be better as a society. We have to be better as a union movement at making sure that those workplaces are free of harassment and free of discrimination for women. African Americans are underrepresented in manufacturing, have been for 20 years. If you go back 20, 30, 40 years, manufacturing was a source of high-paying jobs for communities of color. We need to be frank in saying what's happened, and we have to take action to make sure that the investments are flowing to places where communities of color are, and we have to be frank about making sure that we are giving opportunities for skills, education, and job applications, right? Most people get their jobs from somebody they know. And if you have a largely white workforce, guess who gets the jobs, right? So we got to break that cycle. It takes deliberate action to increase diversity. And in manufacturing, we're behind the 8 ball.
And I think as we talk about ownership, 99% of manufacturing firms are owned by white people, right? And I mean, the literature shows that if women own a firm, they're more likely to employ women. If African Americans own a firm, they're more likely to employ African Americans. So we really have to be real and figure out ownership, because I think ownership matters.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to open it up to you all to ask this esteemed panel some questions. So I think we have a microphone that's going to be floating around back there. So yeah, I'm just going to open it up right now. Anyone has any questions? I saw a hand back there. Yeah.
Hi, Rick Bloomingdale, Pennsylvania AFL-CIO. You know, there was a couple of discussion points, and I'm one of the co-chairs of Governor Wolf's Middle Class Task Force, and Steve mentioned Elk County, and we were just in Elk County on Friday. And one of the issues, you know, I listened to I think Bill talk about, you know, we need to get more manufacturing here, and let me stand up so people can see, here in Pittsburgh, but we have this issue in rural parts of the state where we don't have enough workers. So we seem to have this we have people who live in places that don't have jobs, and we have jobs in places that don't have people, enough people, because Elk County is a couple of big industries there, the powdered metal industry, and they're either union or the non-union jobs pay as much as the union jobs because they don't want to lose the workers to the union facilities, and the paper industry, which is a perfect example of an industry that is being hurt by illegal dumping from other countries and bad trade deals. So that's one of the questions I had. How do you get places that have high unemployment to places that have a need for jobs? Williamsport, the president of the chamber was there. Lycoming Engine, which is a UAW unionized plant, just brought back lines from Mexico to build their small airplane engines. They can't find enough machinists. So, and there's actually an African American community in Williamsport, not so much Elk County, but how do you align those needs? Plus the school district up there is doing incredible stuff on apprenticeship, going back to the shop idea to train folks to go into the powdered metal industry. But there you do have folks getting ready to retire, older workers, because they have a union pension. I don't think, Tom, we're going to see as much of a silver tsunami as we thought, because more and more aging workers don't have pensions. They have 401ks, so they can't afford to retire. So I think you're going to see baby boomers working a lot longer than they expected to. But anyway, that's one of my, how do you align those needs where you have an industry that's growing, and an industry that if it got some help from federal policy on trade, that could be growing. They're looking for which I never knew existed, a paper engineer. I have no idea what that is, but they need them. So that's my question to the panel. How do you move people to where the jobs are rather than moving the jobs to where the people are? Because people will, the factory located up there because of the natural resources, transportation network, whatever the historical reasons for powdered metal in Elk County, I have no clue. But that's where they're at, and that's where they need workers. And to Jay, just let you know, there is a union cotton shirt manufacturing. I'm wearing one of their shirts today in Ashland, PA, Getman Brothers. There are, what's the name of the clothing place here? Laramore's has union-made suits right down here on Liberty Avenue, I think it is. So you can find clothes that are made in America. Just a plug for Pennsylvania manufacturing.
Bill?
I want to say something a little radical here. So in the 80s, when manufacturing left our urban communities, we had a crack epidemic. Now that manufacturing has left rural counties, there's an opioid epidemic. And so one of the big challenges is people not passing that drug test, right? And so we got to figure out something radical and new. Maybe it's figuring out how we can have that drug treatment center, connected to that manufacturing plant. I don't know, but we've got to deal with that elephant in the room, because what we've done is we've let things slip so far, right? And people become so hopeless, right? That we've gotten ourselves in a pickle that we're going to have to get out of, and it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Any comments from the panel?
This may be too abstract an answer. I mean, again, if you go back 40 years, for certain folks in many places, manufacturing was the first place you wanted to get a job. And then, by 1990 or by the 2000s, manufacturing was the last place people wanted to work coming out of high school because of the devastation people had seen and the awareness that there was a high probability of being dislocated, and the growth of, brads below $15 an hour wages. And so, I mean, I think there's sort of three things that in the end, in terms of getting more of the skilled manufacturing workers in the places you need them, as well as possibly getting more manufacturing workers with skills to move from where they are to where there's an opportunity. Three things. We've heard two of them. One of them is Jay's point about calling them robotics technicians, elevating the status and sometimes the wages, again, of the manufacturing jobs of the future. That's part of making young people want to do them again, making people realize that they're not, as physically demanding, as dirty, as, in non-air conditioned places. They're more like working in a research lab or something like that. Again, I do think that lifting wages in parts of manufacturing, because as long as there are those temp jobs and as long as there are 40% of the jobs paying less than $15 an hour, that's going to shape what young people think of as manufacturing jobs. And then the other thing is the employment model. I mean, again, manufacturing workers in the U.S. all had employment security that was attached to a particular company, sometimes even to a particular plant. I mean, given the volatility of employment in manufacturing, given how quickly skills change, given the fact that establishment size in manufacturing has shrunk radically, I mean, in my head, something more like a building trades model, where you have portable skills and as necessary when your current employer doesn't have any more work or goes out of business, you can actually communicate to your next robotics firm that you have the juice they want. Again, institutionally, how you move in that direction, I mean, again, I'd be good with it being an actual skill-based union. But that's obviously a challenge with many employers.
Sorry, go over here.
My name is Joel Yudkin, High Road Strategies, and also National Call to Action. This is for Jay. I'm a big fan of the Manufacturing USA program. And one of the things I like is the fact that there's been an attempt to connect workforce to the technology development. But it's also been pointed out, and maybe you also mentioned it, that a lot of times that's just tacked on. It's the intention is there, but that linkage and integration is not as necessarily all that strong. I was just curious how what you're doing that's different and more specifically, just the nature of the workforce efforts and how you're linking it to the technology development that's taken place.
Yeah, so our charter, our agreement with the government is that we fund specifically workforce projects. We have a separate program that are not necessarily tied to our technology program. We did our first project call just yesterday. We have separate workforce projects from our technology development. And we're the only Manufacturing USA site that does that. We have a chief technology officer. We also have a chief workforce officer, equal footing. At times they will be tied together. We spent a lot of time and some money the last 8 months on a road mapping effort with a large national consulting firm that worked in two areas: technology roadmap and workforce roadmap. So very simply, we are in fact different from Manufacturing USA has been evolving, and I think they've been learning as they go. And we are the most recent evolution of that learning.
Yeah, hello, Tyler Galosh, Economic Policy Advisor. One of the questions I had is we've heard a lot of discussion about engaging folks working capital, right? The idea of, gee, and you pointed out, we're talking about 401ks increasingly and not so much pensions as we roll forward, not just 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the line. One of the things I'm sort of struggling with, and I'd be curious to hear what you've been thinking about, is what sort of outreach has there been and what level of success has there been in trying to get to the firms that those folks are investing with? So I put my money into a Fidelity fund, the investment advisor at Fidelity. How is he thinking about these issues? In the same way that we now have pensions starting to think about these issues in new and different ways, how are we trying to, and to what extent has there been any success in reaching out to the broader investment advisor community so that they're thinking about these things in a more holistic way? Thanks.
Well, there are some people on the second panel who are going to be better at that. But the human capital movement, I think, is...
Yeah, we need to turn on your microphone.
Sorry about that. The human capital movement, I think, is a good start at trying to talk to investment funds and the people they're investing in. I would just say that the best example that's out there is what the environmental movement has done with companies and their environmental footprint. Where are they at on climate change? Where are they at on reducing their emissions? That's a large, well-funded 15, 20-year effort, and I think that's what's going to take for us to get into a better spot around workers.
I mean, in terms of people, I mean, being able to actually invest in their, let's say, home state, right? So there's been some relaxation of crowdsourcing rules recently, which allows, crowdsourcing at a higher level before you get to sort of SEC regulations. I know Michigan a couple of years ago was playing with the Michigan stock market. I mean, worker ownership is another way that sort of people can invest in them. So, I mean, I think there needs to be, there's a lot of bemoaning of the concentration of the financial and the banking sector and the loss of sort of local workout departments that sort of know the local manufacturers. And so I think there's a bunch of ideas around new ways other than responsible investment with big pension funds, but so other ways that people can invest in their own community. There's a lot of experience in Canada, which people have mixed views of, around where there's sort of tax benefits to investing in the so-called Quebec Solidarity Fund, for example. So again, I think we need, in Pennsylvania specifically, one of the things we recommend in our paper is that the Manufacturing Council have a task force to, we got to go to town on these complicated, weedy ways. In the end, I think lots of people would want to put some money in their home state, in their hometown. So, and frankly, some people would take a bit lower return or a bit less favorable risk-return trade-off with that. So, again, as part of the political process of really implementing a manufacturing strategy, I think we have to do both the responsible investment piece, but also think about other innovative ways that people can invest where they live.
One more question? I see a hand back there.
I think I'm the elephant in the room. I'm a female manufacturing owner of a Jeanette Specialty Glass, a glass company that's over 100 years old, and the only one left in Jeanette. And I think some of you know Jeanette is a very trying, very small community. We do have apprenticeship programs. We do work with our local colleges, et cetera, to find both diversified workers as well as workers with the skill and talent that we need. But my question to all of you would be, I don't think there's another manufacturer in the room. So my question would be, I have so many answers for you, but more questions than answers. How do you attempt to communicate with people like me? I'm a very small manufacturer. I'm not a large. So how do you communicate, and what would you give me as advice to help me to keep alive in the small community of Jeanette?
Thank you very much. Please.
Okay, well, our group is a membership organization, and we have members that have 3 employees, and we have Airbus, Siemens, Bosch, BMW, and General Electric. So we, in a lot of universities and educational organizations, I might suggest that one thing would be to seek out organizations like ours and become a member, and attend events and network, and you're part of an ecosystem that's U.S. wide. In that case, I'm a little bit of a sales pitch here from my own business, but that's one way. And I think there's a lot of other places out there. There's 14 of these Manufacturing USA centers. We just happen to be here in Pittsburgh. But I think that's an example of joining groups that have similar concerns and opportunities.
I think it's doing what you just did and being honest. I mean, I think there's a disconnect oftentimes between the policymakers and the small manufacturers, who are really the ones that are the bulk of the employment. And so I think everybody needs to hear that, and we all need to make sure that we're doing a better job, internally, but also externally, in terms of communicating with our elected officials about making sure that you get the support you need. My organization, previous organization, would do that with small startup tech firms because they were often ignored. But I think that's it's a really valid point, and thank you for stating it in an environment where it might not be comfortable to do so.
So the standard U.S. and Pennsylvania model for providing assistance to small and medium-sized enterprises has been one-on-one. So the consultant works with the one small company such as yours. There's a lot of people who think that, in fact, nurturing manufacturing alliances and networks and peer learning actually would be a more fruitful way of, or an additional fruitful way to help make sure folks like you aren't isolated. And so there's organic from the bottom up work on that in the eastern part of the state that the Chester County Economic Development Council and Tom's group has been part of. You know, I mean, I'd actually like to talk to you offline about that issue, but again, a lot of people think that the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, Pennsylvania, that's called the Industrial Resource Council, again, that should be doing a lot more nurturing of peer learning and networks of small company.
And I would just, again with the microphone, I would just say, you know, the skills programs that we run are funded by the Department of Labor. They're available to everybody. We've got a bunch of literature back there about how to get a skills program that runs a little bit cheaper with outside assistance and seeking grants and things like that. So it's the kind of thing that even though we're obviously promoting union manufacturing, we're promoting manufacturing and skills in manufacturing in general because we believe it's good for the economy. And so take a look at that literature back there. There's a place called the Keystone Development Partnership that John is back. Wave your hand, John. Anybody that wants to learn about that, John's your man. He's got the literature on the table back there. All right.
All right, I think we have to close up. I'm just going to ask our panelists if you have any final sentence or thought for this panel.
We got to fight like hell. I mean, the urgency's now. I mean, you know, because we're getting our butts kicked.
Anyone else?
For me, look, manufacturing matters. We've sort of turned the corner from what was believed in the Clinton administration. Gene Sperling and folks like that are now with us on the idea that 25,000 haircuts in the economy are not the same as one Chevy. There's a big difference in manufacturing. You know, is important to our economy. It's important to our standard of living. So we've kind of turned the corner. Now we have to keep going.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here today, and thank you so much to our guests on this panel for a very fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Guiding of that panel. We're going to invite the second panel to come up. People can stretch, and then we'll kind of continue with the program. Stay on schedule. Thanks so much for all the great comments. We'll have ample time to carry the conversation on over lunch, so let's get seated. I'm going to turn it over to the esteemed Harold Meyerson from the American Prospect, who people may have picked up a copy of the magazine, a project that Harold's been working on, focusing on the working class, particularly the white working class in the Heartland region, and you know what kind of policies we have to have a more competitive, progressive narrative that reaches the working class. And so we're really honored that he was able to join us here from Washington yesterday and today, and we'll be moderating this esteemed panel.
Thank you, Andy. This is indeed a panel which actually I think will have some really concrete ideas and proposals, some of them outside the box, which is all to the good. I want to, before I begin, I just want to plug out my friend Josh Freeman, who is a labor historian at the City University of New York, written a great history of the New York working class from 1945 on, has a new book coming out which is incredibly germane to all of this in a few months. I have an early publisher galley called Behemoth, A History of the Factory and the Making of the Modern World. And it really is, and I've never quite seen a book like this before, a history of the factory, beginning in Britain in the late 1700s and concluding with Foxconn in China today. But as I just got this 2 days ago, and as I've been reading it and listening to the discussion that's been here so far, there's some very germane historical antecedents to what we've been talking about here. Several years ago, I think probably during Obama's first term, someone, I actually think Madeline Janice's husband, Donald Cohen, sent me, I don't know how Donald got it, a preliminary report from the Boston Consulting Group that was predicting the course of American manufacturing It was getting very rapturous about the prospects of reshoring from China. Why? Because it predicted that China wages in manufacturing would be going way up, and that the wages in American manufacturing could, this is what I thought was a wonderful euphemism, flex. The wages could flex. Flex means go down. And what it did was it compared where it projected wages in Shenzhen province, the heart of Chinese manufacturing, to wages in Mississippi in manufacturing. And they were all enthused. So I got this. I called the author, a guy named Hal Serkin in Chicago, and we were talking, and it was just, actually fairly appalling. So at the time, I was a Washington Post columnist in addition to being editor of the American Prospect, and I wrote a column sort of encapsulating this, and then I added my own 2 cents, which was that I don't think Americans necessarily think they're going to have a really bright future if your measure of that is wages in Mississippi. This was an early draft I had received of this report. And when I saw the final draft, sure enough, the reference to Mississippi had been dropped. And instead it said South Carolina. So I took this as an index of the real power of the press. I got them to change Mississippi to South Carolina. And this gets me to what is, I think, at the moment, kind of a paradox in the American political economy. On the one hand, particularly among millennials, you have kind of a growing mass sentiment that actual existing American capitalism isn't working very well right now. The recent Gallup poll showed the highest approval level for unions in over a decade, 61%. The millennial support for Bernie Sanders suggests a real desire to change things, but our power to do this, our power to use what resources we have so that the Hal Serkins of this world at the Boston Consulting Group, the original place of employment of Mitt Romney, I should add, don't really dictate the conditions under which we live. But as Jeff Madrick said in his initial presentation, the effect of financialization has really corrupted an entire system here. CEOs don't bargain with their workers anymore. 93.6% of private sector workers are not union members. CEOs bargain with major institutional shareholders. And I think that's an issue even beyond the issue of reviving manufacturing that hangs over all of our discussions. And the decline of worker power can explain why there are 30 million Americans working with non-compete agreements. So if you work at fast food chain A, you've inadvertently signed something that says you can't even work at fast food chain B if they pay more. Or you can be a temp or a worker who's not covered under the National Labor Relations Act. One reason Brad was talking about temps in the auto industry. One reason the auto workers' last effort to unionize the Nissan plant in Canton, Mississippi failed is that there are a couple thousand workers who couldn't vote there. They're temporary workers. I did in the issue of the magazine after this one, I did a rough calculation of the number of workers who simply can't bargain for wages, period, because of they have no leverage because of non-compete agreements, because they're supposedly independent contractors, whether they actually are or not, because they're temp workers. And I came up with a minimum of 65 million American workers, and that doesn't include the fact that, as I said, 93.6% of private sector workers aren't in unions anyway. So I think I view the discussion of what to do about manufacturing as hugely important in itself, but also as a subset of just the effect of financialization leading to offshoring, leading to the wealth transfer that Leo referred to China, also as a subset simply of the wealth transfer from labor to capital. And I will just conclude these introductory remarks. I was rereading John Kenneth Galbraith's sort of seminal 1957 book, The Affluent Society, recently, and he had in there a chart on whose income went up and whose income went down by quintiles in the economy in the decade after World War II, the height of American unionization, 1945 to 1955. And actually, the income at the top 5% declined, while the greatest increases in income were in the bottom two quintiles. And when we think about how to really reverse the complete redistribution of wealth from labor to capital, in the last year, according to Emmanuel Size, the Berkeley economist, the wealthiest 1% got 24% of American income, which is the all-time high. It occurred to me, well, one thing that was going on during this period that Galbraith documents was a very different kind of tax system, a very progressive tax system. And I know Brad in the previous panel was talking about focusing on tax reform that so-called that is coming before Congress. And I'm going to be somewhat utopian here. I think we really need to go back, and if you really want to talk about how to reverse this imbalance, one of the things we need to do is start taxing capital income and the highest levels of income back to levels, closer to levels that they were when this was a more, admittedly, mainly for white males, but a more economically egalitarian society. So that's my abstractions, and now we're going to move to people who actually have something concrete to offer. And we'll go down in this order, beginning with Ted.
Thanks, Bud, and thanks to Tom and Andy for pulling all this together. I'm Ted Chandler. I am with the AFL-CIO Housing Investment Trust. We're a $6 billion mutual fund that invests labor's capital in housing development, primarily affordable housing development that's built with 100% union labor. We are owned by the 400 union funds that invest in us. We're not an investment advisor owned by a bank or separate investment company. And we've invested in about 500 projects nationally. Our focus for the way in which we invest is through what we call initiative investing in particular communities. And in late 2016, we announced our latest initiative, which is called Midwest at Work. And the goal is to spur economic development across the industrial Midwest with a particular focus on the 9 large cities in the Midwest, from Buffalo and Pittsburgh all the way across to the Twin Cities and St. Louis and in between. And we saw this as needed because the recovery of the industrial Midwest from the Great Recession and the associated decline in union membership has really been hindered by a lack of flexible capital and a lack of capital that focuses on the creation of good jobs. And that's especially as compared to the West Coast and the East Coast, where we see capital going very rapidly. So our whole job is to put labor's capital to work where it can make a difference. As a mutual fund, our obligation is to provide a competitive rate of return for our investors, and we have a great track record of doing that. But our mission, the reason we exist, is to create union jobs through those investments. Now, the Midwest at Work initiative has 3 components. First, to invest $1 billion of housing investment trust capital in about 60 different developments across the region by 2023, as well as investments in manufacturing itself and investments in the workforce in these communities. The overall goal is to create more than $2 billion worth of economic activity, and we project that'll create close to 10,000 union jobs and more than 25,000 jobs across the region. The most pressing problem in every one of these locations is going to be different. It's going to be very location specific. We started in Detroit with a single family home repair initiative because there are 80,000 vacant and foreclosed properties in the city of Detroit. Now, this is like putting a ship in a bottle for a fund that focuses on financing apartment construction. but we worked with the local building trades to create a new nonprofit housing development corporation to buy those foreclosed properties from the city, buy several hundred of them. And the key link there is it supports an apprenticeship preparation program that the building trades have called Access for All, to have the young people who are graduates who are in that program do the actual construction work. And more than 60 Detroiters now have graduated from that program into the building trades, local Detroit residents. And when you get to 60, more than 60 people, that's more than 60 families, you're starting to have a big impact in the neighborhoods and in the communities. Those are careers in construction. Now, we're also investing in manufacturing itself. We have a subsidiary. We established a subsidiary named Building America that acquires and allocates New Markets tax credits, a federal tax credit, and we put them towards investments in manufacturing and training. These federal subsidies weren't particularly targeted to the labor movement, not particularly targeted to careers in manufacturing or providing training, but we formed the company to get a hold of those subsidies, to get a hold of that federal money to apply to create good jobs. So we've provided recently $8.5 million in tax credits to a company named Detroit Manufacturing System that builds the interior trim components of vehicles for the big three. Our investment will preserve about 135 jobs at their existing Detroit facility and enable them to open a second site in Toledo that'll employ initially 130 people. And in the Detroit facility, it's about 60% Detroit residents of the city who are employed there. And part of the bargain is the company has to keep the jobs there for at least 7 years, or they forfeit the money that they got. We also are investing directly in workforce development. We're working to close an investment in Buffalo in the Western New York Training Center. And that facility is going to be focused on training people for jobs in advanced manufacturing and in the energy sector. Of about 66,000 manufacturing jobs that are in the region, it's projected that 20,000 are going to be vacant in the next 10 years due to retirements and just normal path of job growth. So it's necessary to train people to take those jobs, or those jobs will go away. There needs to be a local workforce. And we also invest in manufacturing communities. Again, our bread and butter is investing in rental housing. The rental housing is needed where the jobs are created. We want to create the jobs and the housing for folks. And these communities are returning to growth. I was looking at some research recently that showed that the job growth is actually above the growth in housing units, in home ownership and in apartments. So that shows how it's capital constrained in that sector. You compare that to the coast, which are going bananas with housing development. Here in Pittsburgh, the partnership that we've worked to put together involves the development of apartments on the site of the former Pittsburgh Penguins Arena. It's on the other side of downtown across the highway. And the lower hill. The Hill District is the historic African American community. That arena, when it was built in the 1960s, took up 28 acres of the lower hill, displaced about 8,000 people as part of urban renewal. Now we're coming back, since that arena was demolished, to redevelop it, including about 800 apartment units. But what we're doing is linking the development on the lower hill site to redevelopment in the Middle Hill and the Upper Hill community. The redevelopment of the New Granada Theater, which is a historic entertainment site in the African American community, is a very important site in the development of jazz, as well as affordable housing adjacent to it, taking some of the benefits that are created on the Lower Hill site and linking that to development in the adjacent neighborhood. And we're working with DeWitt, who I'm sure will have a lot more to say about this, to ensure that there are local jobs, and not just jobs, not just standing on a corner holding a flag for a month and congratulations, you're on to the next one, but careers in construction, actually organizing, reaching out, bringing residents in to the building trades like I described we're doing in Detroit. On an overall basis, we've already invested $233 million. That's since the fourth quarter of last year. And for about $640 million worth of total development investment. And that amount is basically doubling every quarter. The reception, the need, it's lightning in a jar in terms of what kind of capital is needed and can be invested. Just in the last quarter, we invested about $110 million in 5 projects. That's out of the 11 we've done. And don't worry, we weren't sandbagging it. We didn't expect that level. And I know that my board is simply going to increase the goal as we report back. And they're saying, you know, forget what you've done. It's what you do in the future that matters. So, but all these take very complex partnerships to put together on the ground. It would have happened on its own if that weren't the case, if you didn't have to pull together these complex partnerships. But these are examples of success in putting workers' capital to work to create good jobs across the industrial Midwest. Thanks.
Hello, everybody. I'm Madeline Janis, and I actually hail from Los Angeles. So I'm bringing more of a national perspective and a perspective as someone who's been on the policy side, on the organizing side, on the fighting side. So, you know, I want to start by taking us back to the title of this initiative, Rediscovering Government, and really reflecting a little bit on the last panel and some of the conversation. There's been a 40-year attack on government, not only in terms of the resources available to government, but the power of government, on the nature of our democracy, on the ability of cities and states to actually assert power over the private sector. And if we don't revitalize and take back our democracy as part of any kind of industrial initiative, not only are we going to lose out on good manufacturing jobs, let's face it, but we're going to lose our democracy. So the core of, in my view, in our view, and I am the executive director of a national organization called Jobs to Move America, in the core of our view, taking back, rebuilding, revitalizing good manufacturing jobs, creating industrial policy, starts with the role of government in the industrial economy. And we believe there are, and we've actually been trying out new ways of approaching the tools of government, which are incredibly powerful if we allow ourselves to have a backbone and actually make use of those tools to do the things that we need to do. So I want to point out we have worked with Century Foundation. We're releasing a new paper today as well, called Harnessing the Power of Government to Revitalize Good Manufacturing Jobs. And we advocate for an ecosystem of tools that starts with actually the power of public procurement, together with the power of public subsidies. And I know we're talking here about the importance of millions of dollars and tens of millions of dollars in projects. Well, the public sector spends, and we're talking about in hard times, public sector, according to the Volcker Alliance, spends $2 trillion a year on buying things, on buying goods, services, and infrastructure. $2 trillion a year, that's 12% of GDP. The scale of those numbers are something that we have somehow allowed to kind of slip through our fingers. And we need to reclaim the scale of those numbers. Now, the rules of the road are really important and something that I have looked at for many years. The rules of the road have been constrained by the right, basically attack on what's, government innovation, government regulation as, interfering with the free market. Even though, according to Lou Uchitel's new book, Why Manufacturing Matters, about 20% of the business of manufacturing comes from the government. So we need to reclaim these tools. So I actually have personal experience with redevelopment and using multiple tools of government. In Los Angeles, I spent 10 years as a mayoral appointee on our redevelopment commission from 2002 until redevelopment was dissolved in 2012. And, you know, I saw thousands of projects brought to our board and involving billions of dollars. And again, it was project by project. It was mostly retail projects. It was mostly real estate projects. And I constantly had this idea of, why are we doing things this way? Why do we just let things come to us and then it's yes or no? We approve these projects, not very good jobs, not that many great results. Why don't we actually have a program where we think about what we want? So about 4 or 5 years ago, I helped with leadership from the AFL-CIO and 6 unions and a number of groups around the country to initiate Jobs to Move America, to use the power of what we buy through, and we started with buses and trains and equipment related to infrastructure, to insert new criteria into bidding processes to be able to ensure that we're creating good jobs, we're creating opportunity for women and people of color, we're creating opportunity for training, because those kinds of things, as we can talk about more, are huge in crisis right now. So I'll just end by giving an example of the kind of tools that we've developed that we think cities across the country can start to use to really build momentum. We created something called a U.S. employment plan that could be inserted into city and state purchases of manufactured equipment that can actually create a competitive process upward for which manufacturers are going to create the best jobs, the most jobs, the greatest opportunity for women and people of color, the most training in exchange for winning the contract. And then bringing together all these tools of an ecosystem, the tool of procurement, the tool of government, also the tool of pension investment, private investment, amazing vocational schools, vocational training programs, bringing all those tools together to then win factories in South Side of Chicago, in poor neighborhoods in Los Angeles, in upstate New York, which is where we're starting to see some successes. So I think I'll leave it at that, and then hopefully we can have a robust discussion about how do we take back our power to actually revitalize good manufacturing jobs, create opportunities for Black workers, for women, for real training, and the kind of manufacturing that we should aspire to and not be begging for.
Okay, Dan.
I'm Dan Swinney. I direct the Manufacturing Renaissance, which is based in Chicago. 2 personal things. I was a machinist for 13 years and organized Steelworker Local 87, where I served until it closed. And the other thing which is significant is that my son-in-law has just dropped his PhD program in education to become a machinist, and he just earned his first NIMS credential.
All right.
So I'll tell him of your support for him. So first of all, I think the crisis in manufacturing has been, I'm sorry. That's my phone. The crisis in manufacturing, has been really a product of the financialization of our economy and our society over the last 30 or 40 years. And when we talk about, we certainly do need better redistribution of wealth in this society and better conditions of work. But but fundamentally, we have to have a whole change in how production is managed, and it has to be guided by a much broader network of people, including labor, community-based organizations, entrepreneurial government, and so on and so forth. So the motive for manufacturing has to be not what it was in the first industrial revolution, the purpose for gaining private accumulation of wealth and making a few people very wealthy, but we need to embrace it as the essential means to solve our basic social problems. Only through manufacturing can we solve the crisis of the environment by new products and new processes. It's the only sector that can really build a broad-based middle class, provide a tax base. So that's our approach, and that's what guides our thinking in manufacturing. We are informed, and I'll tell you a little bit about our project work, which I think speaks to some of the concerns raised in the last panel. And we're informed a lot by, in education by Germany and by Denmark and Switzerland, but we're inspired by other models like Mondragon and Emilia-Romagna in northern Italy, where the whole focus on manufacturing is deeply tied into economic democracy and toward a transformation of society as the means to do that. In Chicago, we are basically doing what Leo said we should do. We are working to hold on to what we have and planning for the future. In terms of we have three signature projects, and as an organization, and we've been around for 35 years, and we are not a school management organization. We're not a service provider. We are an organization, a strategic organization that we think can create prototypes that can be part of a larger, transformation, and that our prototypes, can be used by other school systems, by other governments, by other communities as part of a transformative process, nationally. At the heart of our work is, the first thing we did, and it was done in leadership by our organization, the Chicago Federation of Labor, following a study we did on the skills gap back in 2000, is we created a thing called the Chicagoland Manufacturing Renaissance Council, which has now been around for 12 years. And this is a very diverse group by design. Our competitors always have everybody at the table. So in our, in the Renaissance Council, we have companies, union and non-union. We have Republicans, we have Democrats, we have government, we have labor, we have community-based organizations, and we have educators. And the Renaissance Council provides a framework to advance, new prototypes and develop new prototypes, and is able to intervene when things go awry. And it's also sort of the framework we have for advancing policy. And in the Renaissance Council, we have, a manufacturers-only committee that supervises and gives direct, sort of supervision to our work in education to ensure that our standards meet the standards of the manufacturing sector. We are just starting a new organization for manufacturing, and because of this is, and a lot of our work is to gear, to recognize that people are not involved in manufacturing, that manufacturing is fundamental to their interests and fundamental to the development of their society. And we have a legislative and policy committee with the Renaissance Council. So our signature project, it was, has been in education, and we were inspired by Mondragon in that work. In Mondragon, most people began with a polytechnical high school in the 1940s, where they taught young people technical skills of manufacturing, of engineering, of machining, and so on and so forth, but infused it with Catholic social teaching, that the role of the company is to build the community, the role of work is to build the individual. So we started a high school on the west side of Chicago called Austin Polytech. And it's now evolved, and our design for the school is that it's a public school, and we operate what is called the Manufacturing Connect program, within the school. We make a big point to say this is not vocational education. This is, because when you speak about vocational education or workforce development, it really restricts the focus of your attention. We say the purpose of our education programs is to in fact, prepare the next generation of leaders in all aspects of manufacturing. So we certainly talk about production, and we have a very sophisticated shop, but we also talk about ownership, we talk about management, we talk about business development as part of a curriculum that goes into our educational infrastructure. In the program, we want our students to graduate with nationally recognized credentials, and we're affiliated by the National Institute for Metalworking Skills. We want kids to have college credits, and we have a dual credit program with a community college. We want kids to have a job offer, a college offer, and to have experience in seeing the world of manufacturing. And there's a lot more in our literature about the character of our program. And what the education work, and it's true around the country, there are 20,000 jobs in the Chicago area going unfilled. To us, that's a huge opportunity, and we're working to fill that opportunity. And so we now have our education program in 3 high schools and plan to expand. And we are benefiting from TED's funds. We have now the Chicago Teachers Union, through what TED described, is leveraging $2.2 million to provide equipment and staff in our 3 programs in 3 inner city high schools. In the next 18 months, if we're successful in getting the funding, we'll have 50 instructors, members of the Chicago Teachers Union, and 1,000 students who have gone through essentially a apprenticeship program in construction and manufacturing. The other major project we have is what we call, it's the new project, is the conversion project. And again, it's speaking to the issue of ownership. As was mentioned earlier, 99% of companies are white-owned. They're owned by men my age, or maybe 90%, and they're retiring, and they can't push retirement too much longer. We estimate there are 1,500 to 2,000 companies in the Chicago area that are in danger of closing only because of the issue of succession. So we've worked together with the Chicago Federation of Labor, the Local Initiative Support Corporation, the Safer Foundation that works with people with convictions for the ownership conversion project to identify companies through the work that we've done of early warning systems, of identifying companies that are at risk 3 or 4 years before they have a crisis, and then analyzing those companies and then arranging acquisition with our priority being employees first, looking at Black and Latino men and women, and then at the end of the day, anybody who's going to retain and keep those jobs in the area. And we think our biggest challenge is there's going to be a demand that we can't supply initially. And this project is in formation. And then finally, we have these prototypes, but they don't mean anything unless they're part of a larger policy, presentation, as we've all been talking about. So the Renaissance Council is just starting this week, discussion of advancing our industrial policy for the region, which will be, will reflect our thinking. And our thinking is, we believe the future of our society is based in advanced manufacturing. There is no other way. And we have no restraint on any technological innovations, whatsoever, because we have to compete, and we can expand our employment by our competitive advantage in the global economy. But there has to be an equal amount of funding, an equal amount of political resources put into social inclusion and, and human development as part of that. And without that, manufacturing will drive income inequality. With that, manufacturing can be part of transforming society. So our title for our industrial policy is going to be Industry and Inclusion 4.0. And we're going to be advancing a plan that we can put in place by the spring that can shape the discussions in the November 18 elections. Thanks.
Councilman DeWitt.
Thank you, sir. I'm not going to take very long. I'm DeWitt Walton. I'm really blessed to wear multiple hats. I've been a steelworker since 1969. I've had a leadership role in the Pittsburgh A. Philip Randolph Institute since 1996, and I currently serve as vice president of our chapter and program director of our signature program. For the last 2 years, I've served as an Allegheny County councilman, where I chair the Economic Development and Housing Committee. And those experiences have afforded me an incredible opportunity to continue my quest to be a change agent and to help facilitate greater opportunity in underserved and underrepresented communities. I'm truly blessed to have an opportunity to work with folks like Ted Chandler. Truly blessed to have the steelworkers provide unqualified support, and to be able to build that coalition between organized labor, government, schools, and particularly the Pittsburgh public schools, the business community, and community-based organizations to try to create an environment for change in our communities. Because at the end of the day, the challenge that we have before us in underserved and underrepresented communities is to raise per capita income, which will result in an increase in home ownership. And there will be, as a result, an improvement in public safety and the quality of life in poor and underrepresented communities. Because at the end of the day, people that look like me, that struggle like me, and have dreams like me, just want to be a chance to feed, house, and clothe, and educate themselves and their families. They just want a quality of life, and it is our responsibility to make sure that they get a level playing field from which to operate. We just want 100 yards to be 100 yards. We want to crap. We don't want the goalpost to move. We don't want the game to change when we build a kind of capacity that gives us an opportunity to compete. At the Pittsburgh A. Philip Randolph Institute, we run a program called Breaking the Chains of Poverty, a high-performance, high-expectation workforce development entity, where within 8 weeks, we can build the kind of discipline and skills within people that allows them to pass any test for manufacturing and for entry positions, and any test that will confront them to be able to enter into the construction and building trades. I'm truly fortunate to have had a conversation with Richie Stenizzo about 11 years ago. And Richie was feeling some kind of way. He had just gone to a meeting with a community-based organization, and Richie felt ambushed. That folks set him up for a trap, and Richie was mad. If anybody knows Richie Stenizzo, when Richie gets mad, Richie gets mad. And so I asked him, he told me the deal, and I said, Richie, what do you want? He says, man, look, I tried to tell these folk that if they want folks in the building and construction trades, they have to meet a set of specs. And if they do that, these folks will get in. I told him, Richard, give me the specs. And as a result, we designed a program, and we took advantage of President Obama becoming the president of the United States and our dollars to fund our initial program. And we've built that. In the intervening period of time, we've been able to train in excess of 400 individuals. We have an 80% graduation rate, a 62% placement rate, and family-sustaining careers within 18 months of graduation. We track them quarterly. We've been able to really create an environment for change. I'm not as sophisticated as some of these other folk, but I am real, and I understand what it takes to succeed. And people given an opportunity to succeed will meet that challenge. We just have to remove those artificial barriers that are there so they can be able to have a level playing field from which to compete. This panel will talk more about that. We're going to talk about the project at the Lower Hill. We're going to talk about Alcosan. We're going to talk about the cracker plant. We're going to talk about Pittsburgh having a lead problem and going to have to replace a lot of water lines, and People's Gas replacing a whole bunch of gas lines. There's work, there's transformation, and I say we damn well better be part of that transformation, or there's going to be transformation, or there's going to be hell to pay. Thank you.
All right. I want to start with a question for Madeline, because that would lead into, I think, a general question that I'd follow up. Tell us one example of one city, your ability to leverage political forces in those cities, in one city. Pick one of the many you've dealt with to create a factory, and what kind of factory, and using the procurement policy of one city. Give us one quick case study.
Sure. So I'm going to just pick my own city because I can. We've also had success in Chicago and other places, but you know, we just voted to tax ourselves $120 billion. Anybody been to Los Angeles? Okay, so you know we have a transportation problem. And we are determined to solve that problem. We voted to tax ourselves to build a mass transit system and to really rebuild, you know, essentially a Marshall Plan for Los Angeles, or a New Deal for Los Angeles. And, you know, we voted to tax ourselves twice, once in 2008 at the height of the recession, and again just this past November. And, you know, one of the things that was really clear to a lot of us who've been fighting for social justice, that if we didn't make sure that the way we spent that money created good manufacturing jobs as well as good construction jobs, we're going to be leaving out most of our city. So we developed a set of policies that we got our transportation agency to adopt that ultimately resulted in the rail cars that are now starting to run on 12 new rail lines, are being built in the northern LA County. A Japanese company built a factory and is now employing between 400 and 500 people, mostly people of color, not enough women. And then we just voted. We've been fighting for quite a while to get all of the government agencies in our region to adopt zero-emission transportation instead of diesel-polluting transportation, and together with that, make that clean transportation in our region or in the United States. So we now have 2 new electric bus factories in different parts of Los Angeles, majority workers of color. Both of those factories are going to be unionized. Our unionists are going to be unionized. And then we're now thinking, well, think about all the public transportation, waste trucks, drayage trucks, senior citizens vans, all those things. Why can't we be both zero emission, and why can't we be manufacturing in the United States, creating opportunity for women and people of color, creating training. So that's an example. We want to bring that example to other big cities or work with groups in other big cities who can think that way. The things that public sectors do well and do, we can be manufacturing that here.
So here's my general follow-up question. Most American cities, even in conservative states and conservative places, most major cities nonetheless have relatively progressive governments, democratic control at least. I mean, even in Texas, every major city except Fort Worth has a Democratic mayor and Democratic council. So you have a huge range of cities with the potential to do some variant, not in the extent of LA perhaps, but some variant on that. And how the hell do we scale this up? I mean, we've heard about really good, Dan, you talked about, you know, really positive stuff in Chicago. Is there any city in addition to Chicago that you're aware of that has this kind of educational initiatives that you're talking about? And what is the potential for cities generally? Then we'll get to what the constraints are in cities and the need for other levels of government to come in. But Dan, is this sort of thing, do you know of anything like that in any other city?
Well, I think there's a couple things. I mean, there is a lot of interest and there's a real opening to talk about manufacturing and education at this point. I mean, in other words, and I think there's been experience over the last 10 years, beginning with the Obama administration, of really investing heavily in the community college system. It's been relatively little done at the high school level or elementary level, which is, to me, the key place to start. And I think people are looking for models, and we do have a model which we think can be replicated, and we were funded by the DOL because they recognize that. We just recently, as of the last couple of weeks, developed a relationship with the National Institute for Metalworking Skills, the association that is bringing us to Baltimore to set up our program in a Baltimore high school, and we're talking to others. But I want to challenge the notion that the Democratic Party has been some, beacon of leadership on this issue.
No, I'm aware we're talking Chicago, so yes.
In Chicago, so for example, we have a totally neoliberal, mayor who is dominated by finance capital. They have a beautiful 1/3 of the city, and we have 2/3 of the city, which is a wasteland. And we had 700 murders, 3 people being from our own community in the last, last few months. And so my view, and so we're in a constant battle with institutional resistance inside of Chicago public schools, with the mayor and his resources. And our line now, and our focus now, is actually building a political base, ward by ward, around our policy agenda. And our position is going to be, if you don't invest in inner city education linked to the 21st century, that's a policy of 21st century segregation. And that's what's happening in Chicago at this point, because you have, for example, enormous resources done into our Innovation Institute, $350 million into the Digital Manufacturing and Design Institute, but very little to build the educational infrastructure that really allows communities, low-income communities, to participate in a way that DeWitt described, in the growth of the manufacturing sector.
Yeah, DeWitt.
Yeah, it's really important because part of the assumption that far too frequently we make is that because the political leadership may be democratic, it doesn't necessarily translate into progressive. Mm-hmm. And so there's a huge dichotomy in that piece. And we have to understand, and we have to be able to separate the differences and build the kind of alliances and hold people accountable to engage, to force people to engage in transformative behaviors. Here in Pittsburgh, we're really fortunate to have government leadership like the county executive and the mayor, for example. Even though they may not be popular in some issues, they both signed on to President Obama's second chance legislation. They're engaging in kinds of behaviors that that gives people who have made some mistakes in their lives a true second chance to rebuild their careers. Unless an issue has a direct impact on the job that they're doing or applying for, their previous behavior does not impact that application. Secondly, there's a ton of work that's going on within the Pittsburgh public schools to build out career and technical education, which really gives them an opportunity to transform how people live and the jobs that are going to emerge. We keep talking about the technology that's emerging, nanotechnology, biotechnology, all of the things that our society is moving to. There's an understanding and a commitment by the Pittsburgh Public Schools to try to push that kind of education down and to close that achievement gap among among students across the educational spectrum. We're not there, and there's a ton of work that has to be done because, again, change is glacial as opposed to being dynamic. But it's about having the commitment and to put those resources in place and and continue to bring transformation and change in the community. And at the same time, if we create real pathways to opportunity for those parents, then we can engage in a whole host of transformative work, and we can fix the problem that we're confronted with. We just have to sit down and engage in more collaborative, constructive pathways for people to be successful.
Ted, you're talking about all the development that you guys are terrifically funding, and a lot of the other discussion here is about less about perhaps new development than issues of infrastructure and training, and not so much community building as community reshoring, changing transportation modes. How does the investment fund that you run relate to that?
Well, the capital that we bring requires that 100% of the work be done by a union workforce. In addition, these partnerships require government involvement. I'd said complex partnerships. Complex partnership means walking around from city council office to city council office and getting people locally to get on councilors and mayors and state representatives to vote for the change that's necessary to sign on to the fact that capital shouldn't just come where capital's going to flow, but it can be directed towards good jobs for local residents. So here in Pittsburgh, the work that DeWitt referred to on the lower hill, for our capital to come in and for the city to sign on to that, they said, well, we want the voters to get jobs. That's great that your capital is here. That's great that you want to build community, that you want to rebuild what urban renewal destroyed. But we want the voters to participate. Well, our values are that those voters should get careers in construction. So we're down on the ground level rolling up our sleeves to get funding to the programs like the A. Philip Randolph Institute, Breaking the Chains of Poverty, that hire organizers to go out and get people in, work with the social service agencies that will enable them to meet those basic criteria for entry into the trades. Work with the building trades to make sure that there are first-year apprenticeship slots, second-year apprenticeship slots, so the people that graduate from DeWitt's program and enter into an apprenticeship are going to get a job on that development in the city. And public officials respond to that. In Detroit, I think it's because when you explain to them that you want to build, let's say in the single-family homes, you want to build single-family homes that residents can afford to live in, they nod. Because they remember Henry Ford, who said you have to pay the auto worker enough so that they can afford to buy the car they're building. So I think that those progressive government officials understand that, but I always also go back to the late great Senator Everett Dirksen from Illinois, who's a conservative Republican, but who had the wise observation that when I feel the heat, I see the light. And so it's important that they feel the heat so that all these resources come to bear.
Let's get some heat from all of you. Let's take some questions. Oh, over here, the mic is approaching.
Hi, my name is Terrace Verchek. I'm with the McKees Rocks Community Development Corporation, and I just want to give a little bit of a small town perspective to this. Our small town, which is just 3 miles up the Ohio River, was really built around manufacturing. Its entire footprint built around that in the late 1800s around the railroad. And we're looking to reinvent ourselves around that footprint once again. and it's about keeping what you already have. So we have retained a great base of small manufacturers. It's really exciting to hear today that the dots are all being connected. And I'm looking at this panel and the work that you're talking about, Ted and DeWitt, and it parallels what we're thinking, because it's about tying together the investment that these type of businesses create in a community with our workforce, tying it back to housing, getting people to be able to buy a home and to become long-term members of the community, tying all those pieces together and inspiring our young people about careers in manufacturing and the trades, which we haven't done. So it's thrilling to hear about all this. You know, the partnerships that I think it takes to create something like this is going to function well is the challenge. They have to be intense. And in our perspective, you know, inspiring people to leave the binds of generational poverty and really think about a different future, you know, of themselves, for themselves, appears to be the biggest challenge. We have jobs right now in our community, but folks are still facing those barriers. I think one of the critical things that the strategy is helpful for is overcoming the transportation barrier. In our community, 50% of our residents don't own a vehicle. Many of them don't have a driver's license. So that initial pathway to work as being something that they could literally walk to is critical. The mental health situation, someone mentioned the opioid crisis earlier. Again, you know, a big part of what many of our residents are facing. And it's something that we're working through partnerships, bringing different mental health organizations together, really looking at our residents in a holistic way. But I'm curious to see if any of you are looking at that piece of getting people over those barriers, getting them to want to participate and be inspired.
If I may, you right in my wheelhouse, buddy. In McKees Rocks, it is a collaboration of efforts. The county just last year worked with CSX and put in place a plan to do a multimodal project right there in McKees Rocks. You're familiar with it.
Oh, very familiar. Yes.
So as a result, that's just one part of government working to help transform your community. The Pittsburgh A. Philip Randolph Institute over the last 2 months has spent several days at Stowe Rocks High School talking to juniors and sophomores about breaking the chains of poverty and how we can engage in a collaborative effort to empower and enrich students in that high school. Right now, today, on the 9th floor, our Breaking the Chains of Poverty workforce development program is going on, and there's a resident, one of your residents from one of your public housing facilities in that training, who when she leaves this program will have a family sustaining career. It's about how we build that collaborative effort in a demonstrable kind of way. Before you leave, let's exchange information, because we want to work together and build a broader coalition, more substantive protocols on how we can transform McKees Rocks. We want more than, while Doughboys is the pizza shop to go to, we want a hell of a lot more than Doughboys. We want manufacturing. We want power in that neighborhood.
On beyond Doughboys, yes, Madeline.
So I think one of the things that I find often in this kind of discussion is that the discussion is often about creating more will on the part of young Black people, young women, to want to work in good jobs. And what I've seen is that, you know, we're in a global capital world. Who's winning the contracts, the big government contracts? Who's getting the big subsidy? They're huge corporations, and those companies are not hiring young Black men. They're not hiring women. So what are we going to do to make them hire young Black men and women We have to create a whole ecosystem of, willingness to demand, to put into our bid criteria, to put conditions on our economic development subsidies that say that there have to be these new hiring programs, that there have to be good jobs, not just, $7 or $8 an hour or $10 or $12 an hour jobs, which is a lot of what our young people are going into. So I believe that we do need to create a lot more opportunity and pipelines in our communities, but also there's hopelessness because, there's Walmart jobs at the end of the road. So how do we create the good jobs? Well, we have a lot more power than we think, but we have to be willing to exercise it.
Yeah, to me, part of our demand has to be, for example, for the larger companies and larger contracts, is to invest in the educational infrastructure, in the community. That makes that, but answers a long-term problem. What people are willing to do is they're willing to invest in a short-term training program, a 2 or 3 month training program, or something in a community college. But the scale of that is so small compared to the need. And what we found, if you so anyhow, to me, that's one aspect. The other point I did want to make is I think the scope of our partnerships around this issue, around manufacturing and development, has to be very broad and very inclusive. And that's the way you bring about systemic change. So, for example, in our education program, we have like 100 companies, small, privately held manufacturing companies, that work with us because they actually need a competent public system if they're going to survive. But many of them are non-union, and many of them are Republican. We also have our strongest funders come from the Chicago Teachers Union and the UAW and the CFL. And then they play a key role in leveraging capital, as Ted mentioned. The Chicago Teachers Union is now training the manufacturing instructors that will go into these programs. So to me, part of the art of this work that we're talking about is the breadth of our coalition, and it can't just be the traditional progressive coalition or or only a function of the Democratic Party. It has to be much broader, in its design.
I'd like to make one more comment that I forgot. You raised a critical point in your conversation about some barriers to employment, the whole issue of transportation. Jobs, you are absolutely correct. Jobs are not on the bus line, and we have to remove those artificial barriers to people being able to get to work. One is driver's licenses. While there are a number of individuals that have not applied for driver's licenses, but there's a greater number of individuals that have had their driver's licenses suspended for reasons that are completely unrelated to driving. Non-payment of child support, conviction for possession of drugs, conviction for delivery of drugs, a whole host of barriers that really don't have anything to do. How can you expect someone to pay child support and have a family-sustaining career? This coming Friday, there's been a collaborative effort that folks are trying to tackle that issue and remove some of those barriers. Now, Bill said something in his comment in the first panel about the crack epidemic and the opioid epidemic. When crack was running rampant in African-American neighborhoods, it was a character trait. Now, with the opioid crisis running through our communities, it's a medical epidemic. Again, we only want 100 yards to be 100 yards. Cut the crap.
I think it's important to realize how Black Lives Matter has been misrepresented as like a special interest thing. It is 100 yards is 100 yards. That's the fundamental demand, equal treatment. I think we have time for just one more question if we're going to get out of here. So if someone has a quick question and eliciting hopefully quick answers.
Actually, this isn't a question, but you can comment on it. I think we have to be really careful about how we talk about education because the most recent research shows that in the last 25 years, there's been absolutely no progress in the employment of people of color. 25 years ago, blacks were less likely controlling for education and every other variable to get callbacks. You're still 34% less likely to get a callback if you're a black, 25% less likely to get a callback if you're Latino. And that's controlling for education. Yeah. So in this conversation, we're talking a lot about the problem of education and employment for communities of color. And so I want to refer back to what Madeline said, which is, if we're going to do these projects, we have to have very clear pathways for women and people of color to get employment in those jobs. And I think our language has to be very careful how we talk about that, because if we imply that the reason that women and people of color aren't getting these jobs is because they're not qualified, that is clearly bias, and it's just not the facts in many cases. So I just wanted to throw that out there about how we need to watch our own language.
I'll comment. I agree wholeheartedly, because what we found through breaking the chains of poverty, that through our selection process, people have the intellectual ability to succeed. It's whether those artificial barriers are removed. It's whether whether the playing field is level. Because again, who was it? One panel said that where there are more African Americans that are in leadership roles or owning companies, there are more African Americans employed. Where there are more women leading a company, there are more women employed. Where there are whites or particularly white men that lead the company, it speaks for itself.
Just that racism, racial inequality, racism, sexism, they're not a side problem. They're fundamental to the unjust system we live in. So we need to have governmental solutions that put those solutions right in the middle, and make requirements as not some extra thing we hope you'll do, but something you're required to do.
And I'd like to refer to policies that Madeline implemented, that she referred to at the Redevelopment Agency in Los Angeles, where there are requirements for local hire. And what we found after the policies, these were construction careers policies, were implemented with the local hire, that local hire in communities of color went up to exceed the goals. It's easier for employers to meet those goals of employing people in the community and in careers when those policies were put into place. So congratulations on that, Madeline. It's great proof that that can work.
Right. Okay, and I think we need to be cognizant that when people talk about the skills gap, yes, there is a skills gap hither and yon, but it is also a very convenient phrase for the powers that be to say it's your own goddamn fault, when in fact the powers that be have not been investing in productive American enterprise. So the challenge remains. Let's thank our panelists.
Thank you to Harold and to all the panelists. Folks can get lunch and bring it back to their table. We have a very special, two special guests to speak with us at lunch. Senator Kim Ward and Secretary Dennis Davin. So we're really excited, and I'll invite them as they get there at their lunch to come and join us in the front, and we'll start in about 10 minutes. Great, good afternoon. I hope everyone has got some lunch. And when you get it, please return to your seat. We are really thrilled. Obviously, today's event has been really about putting forward concrete change to lift communities and revitalize manufacturing. And so we really wanted to have some important policymakers. This is an issue that has broad support from the American public, has support from leaders of all parties, and so I'm really happy that we have had a bipartisan panel here to share their ideas. We're first going to be joined by Senator Kim Ward, who has been a senator from the Pennsylvania's 39th Senator District since 2008. She was the first woman elected to that seat. She's the current chairman of the Senate Labor and Industry Committee, overseeing important issues like unemployment compensation, workers' comp, and labor and workforce development issues. Since being at the Senate, she's got a wide range of legislative accomplishments on issues related to college access, emergency services, child abuse, driver's licenses, and much more. She's from Westmoreland County, and we did a big report here at Century Foundation about how manufacturing matters here in the heartland and in counties with smaller cities. And look back at the report and show that Westmoreland County had 15% of their private sector jobs in manufacturing, and that's about 50% higher than the national average. So it's no surprise she's co-chair of the Pennsylvania Senate Manufacturing Caucus, and so I'm very excited to hear her ideas about what can be done in Harrisburg to create good manufacturing jobs for communities, really in all communities across the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's just hope we can do more for manufacturing than we're doing on our budget. All right, here we go. Okay, you should always start off making fun of yourself. Usually I make a short joke, but since this podium's low, I'm not going to go there. So good afternoon, and it's very nice to be here today to speak with you about this really, really important issue. The name of the summit hits the nail on the head: manufacturing a better paying Pennsylvania. We all want good paying jobs, jobs to support our families, jobs to sustain communities, and manufacturing jobs check both of those boxes. I'm sure a lot of data has already been presented this morning regarding the importance of manufacturing to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and to the nation. Manufacturing has been a driver of our economy for more than a century. And when discussing Pennsylvania manufacturing, we many times think of U.S. Steel, PPG, Alcoa. We think of the United Steelworkers Union, of which my dad was a member, the United Auto Workers Union, and all of the hardworking individuals who made things, who made our country move. When I think of southwestern Pennsylvania in particular, I think we here helped build our nation. Our steel, our coal, we did a great job here, and it would be great to see a real revitalization of all of that. But additionally at this point, technology. And we are very, very lucky here to have Carnegie Mellon University, because that is an asset that so many people are probably jealous of. So all of that history is really great, but what about tomorrow? I'm confident that manufacturing is not only an important part of our past, but it's an integral part of our future. And I'm not alone in my optimism. The National Association of Manufacturers' most recent Outlook survey found that 93.3% of the respondents were positive about their own company's outlook, and that's an all-time high in its 20-year history. We only need to look 40 miles to the northwest to find a shining example of manufacturing promise. The Royal Dutch Shell cracker plant will employ roughly 6,000 workers during the construction peak and 600 full-time employees once it's operational. It is estimated to have as much as a $6 billion economic impact on our region. And as a matter of fact, one of the companies that I represent, the Elliott Company, received, I believe, a $100 million contract. That is just, we were very, very excited, of course, in our area. The ethylene produced by the cracker plant will be used to manufacture plastic, rubber, foam, coatings, cosmetics, and other products that we use every day. And I think that's an important message that we should be getting out, because right now, whenever we think of all of these things, we always hear the negative of it. I don't know that people in public realize the importance of it to their everyday lives. Further, an IHS market report for March 2017, that would be now, forecast that between 2026 and 2030, the expected ethane production from Shell and Utica will be enough to support up to four additional cracker plants in the region, even after meeting its demand for the plant in Beaver County. That is a lot of jobs. That is a lot of jobs. As legislators, it's imperative that government do what we can to capitalize on this optimism with pro-growth policies. Government support of pro-growth policies can take many forms. At times, it may simply mean government staying out of the way so that manufacturers and their employees can do what they do best: competitively produce goods to be consumed across the globe. When government does intervene, it needs to be through thoughtful policy that encourages investment. Investment in facilities, investment in workers, investment in research and development, and an investment in our future. As elected officials, we must work together with employers, the unions, and government agencies in a bipartisan manner to support our manufacturers. Manufacturing is not a partisan issue. It is an issue that affects our economy and our families. Workforce development initiatives to maintain a pipeline of talent for manufacturers, for one. For a number of years, we have been warned about the aging manufacturing workforce and projected talent shortage, but continue to struggle to really find all the solutions that we need to find. Government and educational providers need to work with the employers to ensure that necessary training programs are available and curriculum is aligned with employer needs. We must continue to leverage the exceptional apprenticeship programs that the trades and many companies already utilize and make investments to support the creation of additional apprenticeship opportunities. We should focus our attention to career readiness and career awareness for our youth, exposing them to high-quality jobs offering family-sustaining wages that are available in the manufacturing sector. In conjunction with career awareness, we must ensure the availability and adequate funding of high-quality career and technical education programs in our schools. I think this should be starting in junior high. We should invest and really work toward making our Vogue Tech programs very productive, letting kids and their parents know what is out there when they enter into these programs. You know, I shouldn't say this, but when I was in school, we didn't do that. Of course, that was a very long time ago, and it's none of your business how long. But we didn't do that. But this is important. This is important that we catch these kids early and we let them see you have real opportunity out here. I want to just point out Dr. Garrity over here, who I have to because you're my constituent. I'm sorry. But he has worked very, very hard with the Advanced Technology Center at our Westmoreland County Community College, and they do an amazing job, and it's a really wonderful, wonderful program. We need workforce development initiatives to maintain a pipeline of talent, which I already did. Okay, that was very good, Kim. We need an energy policy that results, I'm a little bit nervous, in reliable, affordable energy for manufacturing competitiveness. Manufacturers are among the largest energy consumers in Pennsylvania. In 2015, Pennsylvania ranked third among the states as a net supplier of energy, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. State policy should leverage this competitive advantage so that Pennsylvania can really, really take off on what we have here, on our gifts and our assets. We need a tax policy that encourages investment. It is well known that Pennsylvania has one of the highest corporate net income taxes in the country. At 9.99%, it's the second highest in the country, and it's a giant red flag to businesses who are here that might want to expand and to potential businesses that might want to move here. We have to reduce the C&I tax rate. We are also one of only a few states that caps the amount of net operating losses a company can carry forward and offset against future C&I tax liabilities. We need to continue to move toward increasing and ultimately eliminating this cap. We need to invest in our infrastructure improvements. We have to maintain, replace, and increase the capacity of our roads, bridges, rail lines, broadband, and other telecommunication networks. We also have to worry about water, sewer, and gas pipelines. And somebody mentioned transportation. Yeah, that's a huge issue. And I remember when Sony was out in Westmoreland County, for about 8 months a year, they would be temporary workers, but they paid them a decent wage back then. But they couldn't even fill those positions because there was no transportation for people to get there. Manufacturers are not going to locate here if they don't have access to this adequate infrastructure. It's a major concern that we need to put on the forefront so that manufacturers that might want to move here and businesses that might want to grow here know that it's on our radar and we're going to try to do something about it. We need an environmental policy that does not stifle investment. Environmental policy should reasonably protect our land and natural resources, but not stifle investment or bring projects to a grinding halt as the result of lengthy permitting processes and overly burdensome regulation. Permitting processes should be standardized and streamlined, and regulations should be clear and scientifically based. State regulations should align with federal regulations when possible. Something I really do feel very strongly about, not that I don't feel strongly about all of these, because I do, but enforcing our trade laws and enacting a Made in America policies. Domestic manufacturers must be protected when our trade laws are violated. Last year, I proudly supported Senator Jim Brewster's resolution urging the federal government to fight for strong enforcement of our nation's trade laws and to protect our domestic steel industry from unfair foreign competition. While Chinese steel may be less expensive, it's not up to our standards. We should all want the strongest steel holding up our bridges and carrying the gas being transported underground. And we get that with American steel. And we also get good jobs that help fuel our economy and our growth. There are many ways to promote and support a growing manufacturing sector, and we should be a partner from the government of those efforts by listening to employers and the workers and allowing them to lead the way. I would like to thank the Century Foundation and all of the event sponsors for convening the stakeholders around such an important cause. I look forward to working with you, and you can reach me at any time through my office. I'm happy to talk to anybody in the room if they'd like to talk and make an appointment. My good friend, Chris Massantonio from U.S. Steel, summed it up. We had a Senate Manufacturing Caucus hearing at U.S. Steel in May. He said, manufacturing impacts lives. It can lift families up, it can open doors to prosperity, and raise the standard of living for everyone around the world. And I think those are good words with true meaning. We must produce things in Pennsylvania if we want to have a secure and stable place for families to be. We must produce things in Pennsylvania if we want to have a vibrant and we want to have strong communities. And we must produce things in the United States of America if we want to remain a global leader. Now is the time to take advantage of the optimism and opportunities that exist to spark a revitalization of manufacturing and create a better Pennsylvania, and I think our future depends on it. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I want to thank Senator Ward for coming. I know she's got a very busy schedule. I want to offer the audience. We have some index cards on your table. Please write down some questions. I know you won't be able to stay for them, but we'll make sure to get if there are questions for Senator Ward. We'll make sure to get them to her. And then as Secretary Davin speaks, please write down your questions. Our staff will collect them and pass them around. And I do want to make sure you get a copy of the letter that the co-sponsors put out to Governor Wolf, but we wanted to make sure you get a copy of it that talks about reshoring jobs, investing in workers, and revitalizing capital, some concrete ideas that I know probably will follow up with you about. So then everyone else, thanks Senator Ward for coming today and sharing her ideas. Okay, good.
Okay, I just want to go off script because I wanted to do this. I want to just give a big plug here to our Secretary, Dennis Devin. I work with him closely, and he does a phenomenal job. Okay, Dennis, I gave you the plug. Give me my money.
So with that, I want to introduce Secretary Dennis Davin, who was appointed to serve as the Secretary of the Department of Community Economic Development in 2015 by Governor Wolf. Prior to his appointment, he was the director of the Allegheny County here, Economic Development since 2004. He was there, had numerous appointments, head of the Allegheny County Redevelopment Authority, was with Carnegie Mellon University as a fellow, and was the head of the Three Rivers Workforce Investment Board. So in his role at the department, he's spearheading efforts to help Pennsylvania reshore manufacturing jobs and translate its technological leadership into new, innovative manufacturing. I know you're here for the Allegheny Regional Commission, and you're very busy, so we're really honored that you could join us today, to have a leader that's so deeply committed to revitalizing manufacturing and revitalizing communities. Thank you very much. Let's all give a round of applause to Secretary Davin.
Thank you, Andrew. I appreciate it. And Senator Ward, is she still here? Okay. She was absolutely right. She wants something. She's not that nice unless she wants something. No, I'm kidding. She's right there. There she is. She is actually, let me think, 1, 2, 3. Out of the 50 senators, she's in the top 5. Definitely in the top 5. But a great lady, and I'll talk a little bit about some of the things I think our legislature gets a bad rap a lot of times, but there's some very good things that have happened related to manufacturing, and I'll get into that a little bit later on. But it is great to be back home in Pittsburgh, and I want to personally welcome everybody from out of town here to this great city and the state of Pennsylvania. I'd also like to thank the Century Foundation, United Steelworkers, for hosting the event, along with Steel Valley Authority and the Keystone Research Center. So I do bring greetings from Governor Tom Wolf and the Department of Community and Economic Development. Pittsburgh is the perfect place to discuss the prominent role manufacturing plays in our economy and our economic history. During World War II, tens of thousands of Pittsburghers labored around the clock 7 days a week in 3 shifts in the mills and factories to help propel the Allies to victory. We can celebrate this history with confidence because manufacturing did not fade away when dramatic changes came to big steel and other heavy industries in the 1970s. The industry found a new destiny, and because of that, manufacturing today is thriving in Pennsylvania and certainly in the Pittsburgh region. From makers of iconic brands to new startups bringing high-tech, digitally designed products to the global marketplace, manufacturing is advancing all around us. Today, the industry has an $85 billion annual impact on Pennsylvania's economy. The Commonwealth has the 8th largest manufacturing sector in the nation. The Commonwealth is the 6th largest in the nation, state in the nation by population. We can and we need to do better. Led by chemical products, food and beverage products, and fabricated metal products, the value of Pennsylvania's manufacturing output has increased steadily since 2011, according to the Center for Manufacturing Research. In Pennsylvania, manufacturing comprises more than 14,000 establishments and 566,000 employees that represent both traditional and additive manufacturing. These hardworking Pennsylvanians earn an average annual wage of $72,000 in 2015 and can claim some of the best job security in the private sector. These jobs provide tangible proof that the middle class is alive and well in Pennsylvania. Whether it's technology that helps improve efficiency and productivity like 3D printing, robotics, automation, and autonomous tech, or technology that helps connect companies to consumers through new software developments and digital platforms, we're seeing all sorts of innovation driving growth in our manufacturing industry. This success is not occurring in a vacuum. As innovation accelerates across all phases of manufacturing, Governor Wolf has made the development of a high-tech, specialized, highly skilled workforce a paramount component of his comprehensive economic development plan. The competition for good-paying jobs demands that we train the next generation of manufacturing workers, focusing on advanced technical skills and STEM curriculum, science, technology, engineering, and math. And to that end, Governor Wolf's 2017 Manufacturing PA initiative provides a new resourceful tool for building pathways to success. Manufacturing PA is a $12 million statewide partnership of industrial resource centers, our research universities, designed to accelerate the pace of advanced manufacturing technology and 21st century workforce development. Manufacturing PA engages all stakeholders in a proactive, multi-pronged approach. Through this initiative, DCD is partnering with manufacturers, community colleges, technical and trade schools, and nonprofits to identify and train a skilled workforce capable of meeting manufacturing's diverse and ever-changing needs. When we establish such pathways to careers in manufacturing, we ensure the continued growth of higher-paying jobs and career opportunities. We also secure a bright future for our communities, many of which have discovered that a diverse, technologically advanced manufacturing sector feeds the expansion of established companies and can be a key factor in bringing new companies to town from other states or even overseas. One component of Manufacturing PA initiative is the pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship grant program run through DCED. You heard the Senator talk about that. The goal of this statewide effort is to increase the availability of apprenticeships in Pennsylvania to Pennsylvania employers and further assist them in talent recruitment and development. Eligible applicants may include any apprenticeship sponsor operating as a registered apprenticeship program in the Commonwealth. The goals are to increase outreach efforts to those who are unaware of the benefits of registered apprenticeships, give technical assistance to new and existing apprenticeship programs, expand the registered apprenticeship model to non-traditional occupations, and to give apprenticeship opportunities to underrepresented communities. More pathways to success are being formed at makerspaces. I was honored to have kicked off Pennsylvania Manufacturing Week just a couple of weeks ago at Hack Pittsburgh, right up on Fifth Avenue, if anybody's aware of it. It's a great location, great makerspace. Many of the skills fostered in makerspaces translate to manufacturing careers and enable students to experience what it's like to craft and create something of their own. In Pennsylvania, we have makerspaces all across the state for students and adults alike to learn what it's like to be a maker. And if you're interested, go on our website, www.dced.pa.gov, to find out where all these makerspaces are located. Education's role in manufacturing also cannot be understated. The WEDNET program is another established asset that has been especially significant for manufacturing companies seeking to retain jobs throughout workforce development. And I'm proud to say that over the past 3 fiscal years, WedNet PA training has assisted more than 120,000 employees in more than 2,200 businesses. Pennsylvania's strong technological commercialization pipeline also is nurturing success. The Ben Franklin Technology Partners is one of the nation's longest-running technology-based economic development programs. The network drives business innovation and job growth, resulting in more than 9,000 jobs created or retained by client companies in 2016 alone. We must continue to promote innovation. That's why the governor has made Pennsylvania Manufacturing and Innovation Program a part of the Pennsylvania Manufacturing Initiative. The Pennsylvania Manufacturing Innovation Program brings together the Commonwealth's 7 engineering research universities, Carnegie Mellon, Drexel, Lehigh, Penn State Temple, Penn, and the University of Pittsburgh, to support industrial innovation and position the Commonwealth at the forefront of the next wave of manufacturing. This program leverages the internationally acclaimed science and engineering talent and discovery capacity of Pennsylvania's institutions of higher education to help ensure that Pennsylvania remains a national and international leader in manufacturing and achieves the full economic potential for good, well-paying manufacturing jobs. The Manufacturing Pennsylvania Grant Program strengthens these bonds by encouraging manufacturers to partner with technical and trade schools, community colleges, nonprofit organizations that demonstrate both experience and expertise in the development and deployment of workforce development programs. Grants will be awarded on a competitive basis and will be capped at $150,000. Applications that demonstrate private sector investment as well as a path to sustainability will be scored more favorably. Eligible uses of funding include the implementation of new and innovative training programs, curriculum development, internships at small to medium-sized companies, training certifications, and small equipment purchases or shop modifications that will enhance worker training. An emphasis will be placed on supporting those populations that face barriers to employment, including but not limited to our veterans, those who are unemployed or underemployed, minorities, and women. New initiatives such as Manufacturing PA embellish the work that the Wolf administration already has accomplished to ensure the current pro-business climate continues to flourish in Pennsylvania. We've successfully recapitalized the Business in Our Sights program through the reallocation from underutilized programs of $75 million in critical funding to support business development efforts. The recapitalization is expected to create more than 6,500 new jobs in Pennsylvania and lead to more than $480 million in private investment throughout Pennsylvania. Under Governor Wolf, more than $100 million in Pennsylvania Industrial Development Authority loans has brought more than $320 million in private investment and created or retained more than 5,000 jobs. The Wolf administration secured the growth of additional 15,000 jobs by securing the building of the $6 billion Shell ethane cracker plant in Beaver County and further investment, large investment, in the Port of Philadelphia. And don't forget the work of the Governor's Action Team, our experienced group of economic development professionals who work with businesses that are considering locating or expanding in Pennsylvania. We have Lance Chimka right here. Lance, put your hand up. Lance is our regional director for the Southwestern Pennsylvania region of the Governor's Action Team. And since the governor took office, the Governor's Action Team had 193 projects and has made an even greater impact with 23,000 jobs that are created, 63,500 jobs that have been retained, and more than $173 million in state assistance, which helped propel nearly $9 billion in economic development. Many of these results have occurred in manufacturing companies, and it's especially good news for Pennsylvania. And what do we do next? Economic development requires constant vigilance and creativity. We must continue to evaluate the needs of manufacturing. We must follow the governor's lead and expand collaboration among stakeholders in education, business, labor, government to make Pennsylvania more competitive in the global marketplace and ensure the growth of good-paying jobs. We must continue to make targeted, fiscally responsible investment decisions in economic development initiatives and be ever vigilant of the return on that investment. And we must embrace every unmet challenge faced by our workforce, our employers, and our communities. We must never rest in making our manufacturing industry succeed. Thank you very much.
I think the Secretary has a few minutes to stay for a couple of questions. I'm going to have our staff quickly kind of go around to collect questions. You'll have cards. We had a couple that kind of prepared. I think you should have gotten a copy of this letter, your staff, that talks about some of the key priorities. And hope you could comment on them. One was a greater focus on reshoring jobs, from overseas into America. The second was a continued investment, increased investment in workforce strategies like apprenticeship. And the third was something we talked a lot about today before you arrived, was more efforts to bring capital to manufacturers, particularly ideas for leveraging capital like our public pension funds and other ways to, or maybe even a state stock market, made in Pennsylvania bonds, more ways to leverage capital. So I guess I can be curious for your comments on some of these ideas that we've been talking about today.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So I think part of it is, what we focused on in the last couple of years was really based upon education and having an educated workforce and looking at ways that we can make sure that we provide that educated workforce to Pennsylvania and for Pennsylvania businesses. The one thing that we've done and we continue to do is travel around the state to look at what the needs are of our manufacturers and our manufacturing community. And an educated workforce is the single biggest issue. I did read the letter, Andrew, that you had sent to the governor in October, but regarding, an elderly population. And we have areas in Pennsylvania where, they're giving bonuses to their elderly workers. I shouldn't say elderly, over 65, and I'm getting close to that. But to our older workers, giving bonuses to them so they don't retire. That's a problem because they can't get people and younger people to come and backfill those jobs. So there are a variety of things that we've been involved in to do that. One, from the education standpoint, some of the things that I talked about in my remarks regarding building up apprenticeship programs, putting more funding into apprenticeship programs, real dollars into apprenticeship programs that help manufacturers and a variety of manufacturers, not just the existing ones that already utilize apprenticeship programs. There's also probably the best event that I've ever attended. No offense to this event right now, but best event that I've ever attended, and it's called What's So Cool About Manufacturing. Has anybody heard of it? Put your hand up. Okay, maybe 10 or less than 10. Lance is one of them, so he doesn't count. But What's So Cool About Manufacturing is an event that takes, and they do it all around the state. Probably the best place that I've seen it has been in the Lehigh Valley in Bethlehem. But what they do is they take 8th graders and they get a team of 8th graders. So from each school, they take 5 or 6 8th graders and they pair them with one of the teachers, and they also pair them with a manufacturer. And the goal of those kids, those 8th graders, is they give them a GoPro camera, which a GoPro camera with an 8th grader is probably not a good idea in normal circumstances, but they give them a GoPro camera, and their job is to make a 4 or 5 minute video on what's so cool about working at this location. So, for example, Mack trucks. Every Mack truck that you see in the United States is built in Macungie, Pennsylvania, and that's a pretty cool thing. So they go in there and they talk about what is so great about working here, and it is they are funny, they're very thoughtful, they're a little goofy, but they tell a story. All these different videos tell a story about why they think it's so cool to work in a manufacturing facility like Mack trucks. So in Bethlehem, it was 4 different counties. I think it was 25 or 26 different school districts. And they brought together at one time everybody, and they had a competition on who had the best videos. So think about this. So you had the 8th grade students, you had the teachers, you had the parents, you had their siblings, you had the manufacturers, you had elected officials, you had the business community, you had all the manufacturers setting up their little kiosks all over the facility. And there were close to 1,000 people there. And they had a young woman who's their most well-known newscaster, whatever, that emceed it. And it was an incredible, incredible event. And it taught these kids and their siblings, and probably more importantly, their parents, why it's so cool to work for a manufacturer. So we fund that, and we want to continue to fund that and put more money into that program because it is so critically important. I think the senator mentioned it, getting to some of these kids when they're young, not when they're in high school even, or when they're coming out of high school into trade schools and things like that, but letting them understand early on that it's okay to get into a manufacturing environment. You can make good money, you can have a really interesting career, and it's a cool place to work.
The second question we had was the reemployment fund, something I've actually known about for a while, it could provide about $10 million annually in flexible training for apprenticeship and industry partnerships. But I think it's about the sunset. So what can advocates like the ones here today, do to help Governor Wolf kind of reinstate that fund and kind of get those funds reauthorized?
I think it's probably one of the most critical things. The industry partnerships is extremely important. We were able to keep that in this particular budget, assuming that we get a revenue plan, or we may not need a revenue plan given the most recent developments. But the idea is to build up the amount of apprenticeships and the amount of internships and provide as much funding, as much opportunity as we can. So we're doing that. We actually, the Department of Community and Economic Development, as part of Manufacturing PA, will have these apprenticeship programs. And the idea is not for us to have them and for the Department of Labor and Industry, who runs their own apprenticeship programs and industry partnerships to go away, but to fund both equally. And again, going back to what I said before about the legislature, there's a lot of people knock the legislature and some of the things that they do, but to their efforts, through their efforts, I think, the governor proposed this industry or this Manufacturing PA initiative, which has never really been tried in Pennsylvania before, and the legislature funded it at the amount that we asked for. And it is, we think, a game changer because it gets apprenticeships. It funds the industrial resource centers, which are a critical component to helping manufacturers, as manufacturers know, helping our manufacturers in Pennsylvania continue to thrive. And it provides that link to get our research universities involved in helping manufacturers becoming even more technologically advanced. One of the things that surprised me probably most in my position over the course of the last 2 or 3 years is the fact that I go around the state of Pennsylvania and I meet with manufacturers all the time. I was with Senator Ward a couple of months ago in Westmoreland County. And the amount of small plastic things that are made now in Pennsylvania and really through the United States that weren't made here 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And that's because of technology. That's because of folks like Pat Garrity and the work that he does with WedNet and in training. And other people are doing. And the opportunities to provide assistance through the industrial resource centers, the opportunities for low-cost financing through our Pennsylvania Industrial Development Authority and other programs, it's because of things like that really help to get it to that point. And it's going to get better. I think we have to set the table, and in some cases we have to get involved. And I think as Senator Ward, she was absolutely dead right on. Sometimes we have to help to set the table from the government, and sometimes we have to step back and let things happen. So that's kind of where we are.
Just one last question I wanted to share with you. To that last point you made about plastic manufacturing. So the audience member asks, there's a lot of opportunity with the petrochemical plants. How do you balance that with prioritizing the health of communities and people and the environmental concerns? How are we balancing those two items?
That's a good question because you can never solve everybody's problem and you can never take care of everybody's issue. And we think, and the governor strongly believes, we have to have a robust, very strong manufacturing sector. The manufacturers and others also have to play by the rules. And there are environmental programs and there are environmental rules that are in place right now for very good reasons. So there needs to be a good, healthy mix of manufacturers and increasing the amount of manufacturers doing things the right way. And from our side, the state side, it's not getting rid of environmental regulations, it's enforcing the environmental regulations the right way. So I think from our perspective, the governor talks about this all the time. It's not, telling DEP not to give permits. It's having DEP set out what their proposals are, what their timeframes are, and sticking to them. Because the last thing, and the one thing that I've learned in my career is that companies and businesses want certainty. If there are rules to follow, they'll follow the rules as long as if they follow the rules, they get what they need to do. And we think that in Pennsylvania we have some good, strong environmental regulations, but we also need to enforce those regulations in a fair way for the environment, but also for businesses. And I think we're well on the way to doing that.
Well, let's all give Secretary Dem a great round of applause, and for giving up so much of his time. So we've come to the end of this program. First, I want to thank you all for coming and offering so many ideas. We heard about a lot of really important pieces today. The overarching drive to rebuild the high-wage economy, the critical need for inclusion as we develop new economic development strategies, the need to mobilize and reinvest capital, the critical need as not a silver bullet, but as a critical component, reimagining our education system and bringing respect again to vocational education and apprenticeship. And we heard about how difficult it is. You know, I talked to our president, Mark Zuckerberg, about this project when we started. He was having some of these conversations in Washington State in the 80s as the manufacturing first wave hit that state. We had to have the really difficult conversations about having a comprehensive approach that links multiple strategies. It's about evaluating what's working and what's not working. And that's what Century Foundation and this initiative will continue to do. Hopefully, highlight best practices, research problems, and offer solutions. But really try to move forward towards policy change. This is the first regional effort. It's linking efforts that I was proud to be part of when the National Call to Action started during the recession to this effort to think about a high-wage economy. We'll continue this effort. We're going to go to Ohio in January for our next event. I hope those of you have connections and networks there. And we're going to hopefully to build this into more of a national movement around a high-wage strategy that is a national strategy but speaks to communities like Pittsburgh. That's really the whole purpose of this effort. For too long, communities, I'm from Detroit, communities like Detroit and Pittsburgh have been ignored in the national conversation, and we're going to really, through this effort, really bring them back. This is a very hopeful day to me. A lot of great ideas, innovative ideas, a very hopeful day, and we're in it to do this real difficult work of rebuilding high-wage jobs. Thank you all very much for coming.